What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Experience the Truth. Today is a fun one because we have a special guest. His name is Greg Armstrong. He is a pastor, and he's taken it up interesting ministry among the Muslim community. And so, Greg, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first before we really jump into what today's topic is going to be about?
Yeah. So thanks so much, Alex, for having me on. And I think we just connected because I DM'd you on Instagram when
Literally.
I saw some of your videos.
Yeah.
Not too long ago. And
Yeah, because it
yeah,
was
I appreciate.
we you had saw we did a podcast. I think it was like episode 104 where I did the Islamic dilemma and I was raising some arguments against the Muslim community, and you happened to see a couple of those videos and you DM'd me and were like, hey, like, I noticed that you're using the Islamic dilemma. I myself do this, and I'm within that community. I think that there is a better argument than this. And he's like, and you're like, can we talk? I'm like, sure. I'm
Yeah,
all ears. That's really how simple it
yeah.
started.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a pastor. I'm in the broader Toronto area in Canada. In Mississauga is my city next to Toronto. I'm a pastor, church planter. And one of the reasons I decided, along with my wife, to step out to plant from having served in other churches before, kind of, let's say, bigger, more program-based churches, just really having a yearning to share the gospel with people who don't normally get an opportunity to hear.
Hmm.
And I'm somebody who really is passionate about apologetics and sharing with, especially people of other religious backgrounds. I didn't grow up as a Christian, didn't have Christian parents in the home. So when I came to faith later on, I didn't have experience in the church. And so I know it was kind of like hearing the claims of the Bible for the first time when I was a bit older. And yeah, so I don't know if I don't think it's just me. I think a lot of people who have that kind of experience usually have more of a sense of that, let's say, the Christian worldview is, and Christianity and the Bible is not normal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
Because,
funny you say that because, you having that perspective, not growing up in the church, I think a lot of, and that's what the topic today is going to be about, how a lot of Christians, we think that we have strong arguments, but it's because it's based on like our worldview and our perspective. But coming from
mhm.
a different worldview and not growing up in the church, you don't see those arguments that are popular as being convincing, which I think actually becomes one of your strengths.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have my own blind spots, right?
Yeah,
So,
we all do.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, of course, yeah. But I am generally, as much as I can, trying to reassess and be able to, trying to be self critical and not just take wholesale what other Christians may say or the argument they may present.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely one thing that's I like to emphasize to people is if we're sharing with somebody else who is not from a Christian background, but also from a different religious background or has a commitment or an authority that they are following, let's say another scripture or another religious institution, let's say the Catholic Church or the Watchtower Society for Jehovah's
Yeah.
Witnesses, or we're talking about the Book of Mormon or like some other scripture or institution, it's an authority.
Hmm.
So we have to understand that somebody, especially if they're more devout in that other religion, as opposed to a nominal uh, practitioner, that they're really deeply entrenched, and that authority really defines what makes sense to them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's
if
good.
I'm going to speak to them in a way that will make sense and that will sound persuasive, because my aim is to persuade.
Hmm.
I can't make somebody make a decision,
Hmm.
but we aim to be
Yeah,
persuasive,
that's
right?
true.
We read in the book of Acts, Paul, regularly he's persuading or convincing people, and he's reasoning from the scriptures and also appealing to general revelation. So he's trying to meet people where they're at in terms of their worldview, and then bring the biblical claims to bear upon that.
Yeah.
So how can we do that in a way that makes sense and is most persuasive to a particular people group, right? And defining that people group not by, let's say, ethnicity or language or culture, but in terms of their religious commitment. So when I decided to step out to plant, and one of my, deeper desires and aims is to help develop evangelistic strategies that are apologetic in nature, right? About evidence, not apologizing, but evidence. To be able, as you know, right? So, so, and that's going to be different for whichever worldview / religion we're going to be talking about. But I think we can develop a really strong, potentially like one really good way, if not the best kind of way, that we can find for each religion respectively.
Yeah.
So I believe, just especially in the journey that I've had in the last, especially few years, connected to a good friend of mine who's also named Alex.
That's a good name.
Yeah, so Alex Kerimli, who kind of developed the foundations of this methodology that I'd love to share today. And we're trying to get it out there for people to learn. It's very different. There are some similarities with the Islamic dilemma, but it is not the same. And nobody really knows it. And yet what I found was when actually talking to Muslims, like I watched, like especially people watching this video may have experience with seeing lots of videos, maybe short clips or longer videos by, the typical players in this realm of David Wood and Sam Shamoon and Hatun Tash and Jay Smith and so on.
Yeah.
And hear these arguments like the Islamic dilemma, but also many others, moral criticisms or historical skepticism and so on. And then they want to actually use it, actually talking to a Muslim. Like, it's a different thing to watch videos than to actually try to communicate that and try to be persuasive to another person who believes it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, for a number of years, I watched videos. I was learning all the content. I love apologetics. So, I kind of devoured that a lot. But then when actually talking to Muslims, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
Right? Yeah. And I discovered soon also, if they're somewhat knowledgeable, they don't have to be a scholar or imam or sheikh. They could just be your regular average Muslim who's practicing, who knows a bit of their apologetics. They can dismantle, the vast majority of the kind of stuff that's out there. But also they can, they're not, even if they can't dismantle it in a way that you or I as Christians would be convinced and like thinking that that's a good answer.
Yeah.
They think it's good enough and they're still a Muslim. So for me, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
I want to actually move it along and be persuasive. So that's what motivates me. And so that's why I'm here to share what I've found. And I hope you guys will find some insight from it.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get into this, and I think it is important. When I was actually telling one of the guys I disciple, as he's recently come to the faith, and now he's trying to witness to his friends and family who are following suit and asking him all these questions, and so he's always calling me like, "What do I say? My atheist friend said this, or my Muslim friend said this." He's just surrounded by all these opposing opinions, and I told him, I said, remember. It's not an argument where you are just flexing your knowledge or looking to beat people over the head. Understand their perspective and present the information like you want it to be understood. Because I'm like easy, and he's like, what? I recognize that I was just bumping people and thumping people on the head, and was like, here's the evidence, take it or leave it. But he wasn't really convincing anyone, or he wasn't being persuasive. And I think that's been a lot of our culture right now with these videos that you're talking about, is a lot of these guys, these younger guys are consuming it, and they're just wanting to dunk on people rather than, face to face, in person, wanting to make this make sense and bring people to belief. That's why we use these arguments, and that's why we equip ourselves. Not that we feel good and our ego is stroked, but that it would win people to Christ, and it would dismantle arguments that put themselves above the knowledge of Christ. So that's my heart in bringing you on, and hopefully that you get this today as you guys are listening, that it would make sense for you and you would be equipped to engage with your Muslim friends with this argument, because it's pretty profound,
maybe
and you'll
I should
see that.
add on to that, because I think it's helpful to know before we get into like the weeds of the argumentation and the facts and stuff, that the more that you know Muslim people, it's actually, I found it, okay, so what we're asking of them is to essentially be willing to make a commitment where realistically, in many cases, they're going to lose their entire family.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think usually it's going to lead to violence in the West, especially, but sometimes we're also meeting people who've immigrated to the West, and their family is in the East, and so for them to convert here, then it's like, I'm speaking of people I know too, right? So for them to then go visit their family back home overseas, have they told them?
Yeah.
And if they tell them, what's going to happen, right? Can they actually go visit them anymore? Are they cut off for the rest of their life? Okay, these are real pastoral questions. Like, I'm a pastor too, not just right. And walking through that process for people. So keep that in mind. And it's not actually, like, I know one person, he struggled with, isn't it selfish of me to to make this decision for myself, to follow Jesus? Like, he's convinced that Islam is false. He was quite convinced, more convinced that Islam is false than Christianity was true, but also quite convinced that it is. And is it still selfish of me to make this decision, because it's going to bring all of these harms that will have this cascading effect on his whole, not just like his, we think of a nuclear family when we're from the West, but they're an extended, all their extended family is part of it.
Yeah.
So he was telling me, just like as an illustration, to begin to get the scope of it, he said, I have a cousin she's engaged, and he said, like, if I make this decision and, like, in public about it, she'll lose her engagement.
Wow.
Like a cousin.
Wow.
So
she's affected.
This isn't
by
even like, because, we're talking about, like, arranged marriages where both families are involved, and the family is looking at, oh, you've got an apostate in your family. I don't know if I want to marry, into this family. Wow. And it affects not just that, it's business arrangements. It's huge. Yeah. So he really struggled. This is really seems like selfish of me to make this decision. So, okay, so all of that being the case, obviously you and I very firmly believe, yes, it is worth it. Christ is worth it. Christ, of course. But for someone in that position, they have to count that cost. Yeah. And we're inviting them to make that decision. Okay. Yeah. So should we expect, like, a single argument is going to convince them? Yeah. To
stake their entire family on that.
The Islamic dilemma is such a strong argument that they're going to lose their family, etc. I just that's what I want to put in real life perspective. Yeah. And we have to have compassion for them.
That's true.
And also, so it's my aim that we need to have an airtight argument, but it's not just a single argument. We need to build a case so that it's not like one thing, because if it's one thing, well, maybe they can they don't know the answer to it. But if it's a whole load of things where basically they don't have any good answer to any of it, and then it's very clear that it's not true, then it's up to them what they're going to make it, how they're going to decide about that.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to, in a way, overwhelm them with the weight of it so that they feel very confident they're making the right decision.
Yeah. That it's not just obscure details and here and there, that it's, and you're going to provide that tons of discrepancies. So what do you say we get into it today? So where do you want to lead me first? If you were, I'm the listener right now, and I'm the face of all those that you're talking on the other side of the screen. How would you walk me through that in order to persuade me?
Well, if you're on the Muslim side of it, why don't we? Let me see here. I'm going to pull up what I would share with them first. And
Perfect.
We're going to do a couple different screen shares.
Yeah, this will be fun. You guys are going to want to make sure you're watching to the end of this video. This will be a fun one for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to share on Qur'an.com. So
I'll pull up,
up here.
The screen right here.
All right, so this is on the Qur'an.com, and so first thing though, I'm gonna ask a question, and if I was in person, it'd be different. Okay, so if I'm in person, okay, I'll show you. You can see my little screen. Okay, here's a Hebrew Bible. Okay, so I'll pull it out. I'll show them the Hebrew text.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a Hebrew Old Testament or a Hebrew Torah. By the way, you don't ever say Bible.
Yeah.
Muslim. Okay.
Why is that?
I mean that, like, that's a rule. Never say Bible, because Bible. What does a Muslim think Bible means? Do you know?
Not sure. What are they thinking?
Bible means the scriptures that the Christians believe.
Okay.
Not the scriptures the Jews believe.
Okay.
Which is weird, because we believe in Old and New Testament.
Yeah.
Right. We have the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament in our Old Testament, in our Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible actually refers to all of that, right?
Yeah.
But for Muslims, they think the Christians have different scriptures than the Jews. Of course, we have more, but we have all of theirs too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. So the Hebrew Bible, noted.
Yeah, the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew Old Testament. You can say Old Testament, but
Old
especially
Testament,
that you want to definitely use the word Torah, because the
Torah,
the Quran talks about the Torah, right? In terms of previous scriptures, it's the Torah, the Zabur, which is the Psalms, and the Injil, which is gospel singular. And so now we don't talk about the gospel. We don't talk about the New Testament with Muslims. We only talk about that is until we've dismantled Islam. So just to give a overview so we know where we're going to go before we get into the verses.
Yeah.
So the first stage, which is the vast majority of what we're going to do with a Muslim, is we're going to dismantle the Quran first. So before we can share the gospel, our aim is to share the gospel. But that is essentially the last thing that we're going to do with a Muslim, is share the gospel.
Yeah, because you got to show that
we want to get.
Yeah, that their position is not credible before you can take them to. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because the Quran rejects Christian doctrine. So if I'm going to reason with them from the New Testament or about Jesus or the Trinity or atonement or etc., or defend the credibility of the text of the New Testament, none of that is relevant, and we'll get nowhere because the Quran rejects all of that. Okay, so we focus only on Old Testament or Torah, and many Muslims don't differentiate. They don't know what the Old Testament is. The vast majority of them, they think maybe Torah is that whole thing. Jews can use the term to refer to the Pentateuch or the whole thing. And the Quran refers to various prophets outside of the Pentateuch, like Jonah and Job.
Yeah.
And David and Solomon, they count as prophets, so on. So it's not just limited to the Pentateuch, but if you have someone who's more difficult and they'll say, well, Torah is not the whole Old Testament. It's like, okay, well, we only need the Pentateuch anyway. So we say, so what we're going to raise with them is issues about the Torah, and we're going to first look at what does the Quran say about the Torah, and then we're going to look at narratives and compare the specifics of the details in the narratives to show that there are many, many differences. And what I want to emphasize to everybody is that these are differences about things that are not theological in nature. Okay, so we actually are doing something that's probably very counterintuitive to Christians. So we don't want to engage about theological issues.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to engage about, I like to say, details, not doctrine.
That's good. Details, not doctrine.
Details in the narratives and the stories that are parallel between the Hebrew Old Testament and the Quran. So you have to know what narratives are there in the Quran that are parallel, and we're going to show them. But first stage, we're going to bring up a Hebrew Old Testament, and I'm going to say, do you believe the Hebrew Torah, the Old Testament, has been changed? That's the first question.
Okay.
And they're going to say?
They're going to say no, right? They don't believe the whole Old Testament?
They're going to say yes.
They're going to say yes.
Of course they're going to
I knew that.
Of course they're going to say. Now, there have been a few that have told me no, that's fine.
Yeah.
They're going to change their mind once I start showing them differences, right? Because once I start showing them differences, they're going to say, oh, yeah, I guess I'm going to leave my Quran behind. No, they're going to try to defend it, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what they say at that point. Usually they'll say yes. Sometimes they'll say, the rare person says no. And I've had a few people tell me, like, oh, well, maybe the text is not corrupted, but the interpretation, which is actually what the Quran teaches. Okay, so
that it's not the
fine.
text, it's the interpretation. That's their big thing. Okay.
Yeah, so because if you think about it, when Christians and Muslims have these debates and go back and forth, what do they focus on?
They talk about the deity of Christ, right? That's the biggest thing.
Deity of Christ, Trinity, the cross, right?
Yeah.
But where is that in the Old Testament? So, I mean, we can say there's like maybe in seed form, there's like the beginnings of Revelation that relates to things like the Trinity. There's prophecies of the Messiah dying, fine. But otherwise, we don't have the cross explicitly. We don't have the Trinity fully revealed.
Yeah.
Right. And certainly they don't know about that, right? Because it's not like they've read the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So they're normally engaging with Christians about Jesus stuff, and Christian doctrine based in New Testament revelation. So from a Muslim perspective, how are they going to be thinking about the Old Testament? Are they going to be thinking about it as filled with all these differences and contradictions as compared to the Quran?
Yeah,
no, they're going to be. They're going to be thinking primarily that we have common ground on that because, like before Jesus, don't we share? They say we believe in all the prophets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so they think that we have common ground on the prophets, and often Christians will just say yeah, and so then we zero in on Jesus. I say no. We don't have common ground. Okay.
Yeah.
All the ground that you think is common between us on the Old Testament figures, which for us are not all prophets, like Adam and Noah. Those are not prophets, but they're prophets according to Islam. So biblical figures that are being regarded as prophets, we don't agree on any of those figures because in all of the accounts are very different.
Yeah.
Okay, and not just different, they're incompatible. So the Christians aren't talking about this, and they're not aware of the Quranic versions mostly. And unfortunately, the Christian apologists who know more about Islam are not talking about it really. They have a few examples that are very popular that they're going to use all the time. Okay, and we're saying we need to get beyond those popular examples that the Muslims already have their answers to and get into what is there. Okay, so if you think about it, for a Muslim, they've been taught that the biblical scriptures, which would of course include the Torah and the Old Testament, were changed.
Yeah.
Now, for a Muslim, do they know what has been changed?
Yeah, I wouldn't
claim.
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, they're not told what specifically was changed. They're just told in general, right? So our job is to show them specifically, if they're going to maintain that claim that it's corrupted, we're going to show them all these specifics of things that they're going to have to say, okay, those specific things were changed, Okay, and then they're going to have to account for it. Okay,
Yeah.
so the first thing we're beginning with is, do you believe the Hebrew Old Testament, the Torah, has been changed? Second question is, okay, of course, yes. When do you believe it was changed? Do you believe it was changed before Muhammad or after Muhammad? And how they answer that question, it also doesn't matter.
It varies.
They say before or after. You know, if they know more their apologetics, they're going to want to say before. Okay, but it's fine. They say before, they say after. Often they say, I'm not really sure. Because again, it's a general claim that it was changed.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, then we say, okay, so can we share with you some verses from the Quran about the Torah? Okay, so that's how we lead into the conversation. And then we're going to go to various verses. So let me, if we...
Yeah, I'll go back to the screen.
Got it. Yeah, the shared screen.
Here we go. Okay,
so this is in Surah 7, verse 157. So if I'm talking to a Muslim, this is the first verse I would show them. So I'm going to show you the... we got the translations cut off a little bit.
A little bit cut off,
yeah. It's not too cut off, but yeah, if you want to adjust it, you can, but I'm going to read it. So this one here, and actually I'm going to highlight just the first sentence because that's what matters. Okay, so it says, they are the ones who follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whose description they find in their Torah and the gospel. I'm going to say, I don't really care about the gospel right now. I'm only concerned we're looking at the Torah. Okay, so what is the Quran saying here? They are who is the messenger, the unlettered prophet, according to the Quran?
It would be the Muhammad, right?
Yeah, Muhammad. Yeah. So unlettered, meaning he's illiterate. Okay, so and that's some point that they believe, which if viewers are unfamiliar, that's part of what they believe. Okay, so Muhammad. Who are the followers of Muhammad, whose description they find in their Torah? So that would be Jews, because who has the Torah?
Yeah, the Jews.
The Jews. Okay, and they are the ones who follow the messenger, so they are followers of Muhammad. So this is referring to Jewish background converts to Islam in the time of Muhammad. So that's in the 7th century. And they found his description in the Torah. Okay, so we're not evaluating the claim at this point. We're just pointing out what is the Quran claiming. Okay, the Quran is claiming that in the 7th century, there were Jews who converted to Islam who found Muhammad prophesied being described in the Torah. Okay, so that's not talking about today. We're not talking about the claim of the Torah today. We're not talking about the Torah hundreds of years before the time of Muhammad. We're talking about it in the time of Muhammad. Timing is like one of the key things we need to focus on.
Yeah.
And here it's not saying the whole thing is reliable, but what we are seeing is clearly from the Quran's point of view, the prophecies of Muhammad, were they changed or not changed at this point?
Well, they weren't changed because they prophesied to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They found him described in the Torah. So that means at least the prophecies of Muhammad must have been there in the 7th century.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to go share a different one now. I'm going to share my PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So the Torah, we know for a fact that up until at least the time where Muhammad appears on the scene, that it hadn't been corrupted up until that point because they believed that there were those Jews in the 7th century who saw him revealed in the Torah. That's interesting.
Right.
So it couldn't have been before because it testifies to him.
Right. So it's very important that we see what is the Quran claiming and understand it accurately before we evaluate it.
Yeah.
And we want to help. Essentially, we want to be good exegetes, right, of any text and not misrepresent the other side. Okay. So those are the questions that I would begin with.
Yeah.
So the next passage I want to show. So 7:157 is a very good one to start with because, as you can see, like there's nothing to debate about it regarding that, and it's the easiest one for them to accept.
Yeah.
And don't overstate it. Don't say the whole Torah is reliable. Don't talk about the Bible, okay? Because it's not the Bible, it's the Torah. Remember?
Yeah.
Okay. Bible for them means the Christian books.
Yeah, no
Okay.
word.
And it doesn't matter if you explain it; they can never seem to wrap their head around it, I find. So, yeah. So okay. So then the next verses I might share is from Surah 2, verses 40 to 44. I usually share, but here's 40 and 41. So I just read it with them, and then I'm going to ask them questions. So it says, "O children of Israel, remember my favors upon you. Fulfill your covenant, I will fulfill mine. And stand in awe of me alone. Believe in my revelations, which confirm your scriptures. Do not be the first to deny them or trade them for a fleeting gain." Okay, so who is being addressed here?
This is to the Israelites, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
O children of Israel. That's verse 40. And of course, it's Allah speaking according to the Quran. So he's addressing a message to the children of Israel, the Israelites. Now, the key other question is when. Is he talking about, let's say, in the time of Moses, or what time is he talking about? And what would tell us when it is? So go to verse 41.
Yeah.
Believe in my revelations. Yeah. Now, my revelations refers to the Quran.
Okay.
Which confirm your scriptures. Okay, so clearly, the my revelations, how we know it's not referring to previous scriptures.
Yeah.
When it says believe in my revelations, is because it's confirming something else. Okay, it's confirming your scriptures. So it's not referring to their scriptures. Okay, it's my revelations is something distinct from your scriptures.
Yeah.
So my revelations is the Quran, and every Muslim accepts that, which confirm your scriptures. So who is the your?
That's the Israelites. Yeah.
Right, or the Israelites or the Jews. Now the question is when. Well, when was the Quran given?
That was like the 6th, 7th century?
7th century, so early 600 century. During the lifetime of Muhammad.
Yeah.
So again, we're in the lifetime of Muhammad. The Quran is being given. Believe my revelations, the Quran, which confirm your scriptures. Which would be which scriptures?
The Torah.
The Torah. Yeah, the Torah, because it's the scriptures that belong to the children of Israel. Okay, now it's the children of Israel in the time of Muhammad. So it's referring to confirming. And it doesn't say confirming the scriptures that were lost hundreds of years before the time of Muhammad. It's confirming the scriptures of the children of Israel in the time of Muhammad. And in fact, this is the clear Quran, but if you look at it in the Arabic, it literally says confirming that which is with you. Okay, so it actually doesn't use the word scriptures. It says confirm that which is with you. But everybody understands referring to their scriptures.
Yeah.
But it's confirming, in other words, that which is with you, the Jews in the 7th century, not confirming the ones that were hundreds of years before they got lost or changed. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, to me, this is obviously, it's confirming the whole thing. But some Muslims will say, well, it's not. It doesn't say the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I say, okay, well, it doesn't say it does. It's only confirming part of it.
Yeah.
But, okay, fine. If they're going to argue about it, a good principle we follow is, because we're trying to be persuasive, not just argumentative.
Yeah.
We don't need actually the whole thing. Okay? So all we need is specifically what the Quran is claiming would not have been tampered with at that point. Okay? So what so far do we know was not tampered with in the 7th century in the Torah? Think of what we began with.
The covenant, right? Or the...
Well, think of Surah 7, 157. What did they find in their Torah?
Oh, it was talking about the prophet or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
Prophecies of Muhammad being described in the Torah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, at least that, we can say, like, without any argumentation, okay, like, definitely that's not corrupted, right?
Yeah.
Okay, for sure. Okay, fine. So let's keep going. So let's come back. This is a good image for people to see. So sometimes I illustrate for them with a book stacking illustration I use. And if you look closely, the bottom of the stack is the Hebrew Old Testament that I was showing before. Then on top of it, I have a Greek New Testament. So usually what I'll do is I'll pull out both those books and I'll say, okay, so as a Christian, I believe the Hebrew Old Testament, the Greek New Testament. Okay, and Greek New Testament, of course, I'm associating as the scriptures associated with Jesus, but put aside what you think of it for now. Let me just explain to you what I believe, and I think it will illustrate what we've been talking about, which is that the Quran says it confirms the previous scriptures, namely the Torah. Okay, and another word that is used to translate the term for confirm is fulfill. So usually I'll say it confirms or fulfills. Okay, so I believe that Jesus is the Messiah prophesied in the Hebrew Old Testament, and that he came and fulfilled the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say hypothetically, put aside what you believe as a Muslim and what I believe as a Christian. Let's talk hypothetically. Let's say Jesus came along and he made that claim that he came to fulfill prophecies of him in the Hebrew Old Testament. And let's say hypothetically he didn't. Okay, he didn't fulfill it. He contradicted the prophecies. In fact, he taught things also that contradicted the law and the Old Testament teachings. Okay, so on that hypothetical, should I accept Jesus as the Messiah?
No.
What do you think?
No, if he contradicted.
No.
Yeah.
Why? Exactly. Because he claims that he fulfills it, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look, then I'll usually say, okay, so, but obviously I do believe he fulfilled it, and so I accept him, and so I accept the scriptures associated with him, so I accept Old and New Testament. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll bring out the Book of Mormon, and I'll say, okay, so here's another guy, Joseph Smith Jr., who claimed in like about 1830. Here he brings another testament. You got the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Book of Mormon, another testament of Jesus Christ, he says. Okay, so he says his book agrees with the first two books, and he claims that he was prophesied, funny enough, in the Torah. Okay?
Yeah.
If you read, Joseph Smith has his own version or his own quote-unquote translation of the Bible, including the Torah. And if you look at the very end of his inspired version, that's what it's called, of Genesis, at the very end of Genesis 50, he added more verses into it, which talks about him. Okay, so that's great. It's like the original Torah before it was changed, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
talking about him. So if he says, look, I got a third book, it agrees with the first two books, it confirms it fulfills them, am I going to accept it? No, I'm not going to accept it. But why am I not going to accept it? You tell me.
You tell me.
Okay. Well, why aren't you going to accept it?
Well, why? When I would say I don't believe. Where would the scriptures have attested or prophesied of you?
Okay,
like, how
sure.
can you prove
Yes,
that?
you're going to say where, but overall, and I can't expect that you know tons about Mormonism. But let's say you probably know enough that you know there are teachings in Mormonism that contradict the Old and New Testament, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if he claims that he comes along and he's confirming or fulfilling it, but he contradicts it, obviously his claim is falsified. He made the claim, so that means he's providing the test. Okay, so I can go and check it. It's not like he believes it's not like somebody coming along, let's say from a Hindu background, and says, I'm coming and fulfilling the Vedas. Okay, well, that has nothing to do with the biblical scriptures.
Yeah.
So you've got two different streams of religious traditions that don't meet. Okay, so that claim doesn't mean I can go to the Bible and check what it says to obviously falsify it. Well, I have to establish the Bible first.
Yeah.
So, but for somebody who comes and says, I come in fulfillment of what it says in the biblical scriptures, then he's providing the basis for a critical examination of his claim. Okay?
Yeah. So
then, we're basically saying the same thing about the Quran. Okay, so the Quran claims, put the Book of Mormon aside. I won't get into the top book for now. But there's a test I could use within Islam also. So the Quranic claim is that it comes and confirms or fulfills the previous scriptures.
Yeah.
The Torah, the Zabur, and the Injil. Say, well, we're not talking about the Injil or the Zabur right now. We're just talking about the Torah. So, in other words, does it confirm or fulfill it? Okay. So that is the concept that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And that's what the Quran is claiming about itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to move on from there.
Yeah.
Let's go on to this verse in our PowerPoint. So Surah 1094, some of the people watching this will be familiar with this. Okay, so then let's say, okay, so if, actually, you know what? I want to share a different one before we get there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stop sharing that, and I'm going to go back to Quran.com.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, got it here. And we're going to go to Surah 5. And we're going to go to 43. And actually, I'm also going to pull up another thing here. I'm going to start with verse 43, so I'm actually going to change it to this tab.
Perfect.
So I'm going to walk through a few verses that are in a row, and this is the first verse. So I know it's small, but it's this verse here. So it's Surah 5, verse 43. And it says, "Why do they come to you for judgment when they already have the Torah containing Allah's judgment, but they turn away after all? They are not true believers." So why do they come to you for judgment? The you is referring to Muhammad.
Yeah.
When they already have the Torah. Okay, so like without knowing any more about the context, we can already establish something. Who had the Torah in the time of Muhammad?
That was the Jews.
Right. So who are they when they came to you for judgment? Is the Jews. So the Jews come to Muhammad for judgment. They have the Torah, and then they turn away after all. They're not true believers. So what the Quran is saying about the Jews in the time of Muhammad, so again, notice the timing, 7th century, they come to Muhammad, and they want him essentially to provide judgment in one of their cases. So I'm going to actually show you this in the hadith here, right below, and it's this hadith, which is from Sahih Muslim. This is a narration of an account of Muhammad interacting with Jews in Medina, and there's a legal case that's brought to him, and he rules in that case. Okay, and this is a very important one. It's not one that Christian apologists usually are using. They're usually using this other one here, which is Sunan Abu Dawud 4449, which talks about the Torah being brought and being placed on a cushion.
Oh, yeah.
That hadith is less reliable in terms of its transmission. This is Sahih Muslim, and actually this also provides the exact context for the verses we're talking about.
Interesting.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's telling you the setting in which these verses in the Quran were given.
Yeah.
And so it says that it was narrated that a Jew whose face had been blackened and who had been whipped passed by the messenger of Allah, so passed by Muhammad. He called to them and said, "Is this how you find the punishment for zina in your book?" So let me explain this. So the first part is saying that a Jew whose face was blackened and who had been whipped passed by Muhammad. So there's a Jewish guy in Medina who had been punished for zina. Zina is the Arabic term for fornication or adultery.
Okay.
So basically, he's committed a sexually immoral act, and he's being judged for this, and has been the sentence that's been put upon him is that his face has been blackened and he's been whipped. And Muhammad sees him basically being paraded throughout the street with a blackened face. So essentially, he's treated shamefully in this way. And then Muhammad calls out to them and says, "Is this how you find the punishment for adultery in your book?" Okay, now I'm going to ask you, is that the punishment for adultery in the Torah?
I don't think so.
To blacken someone's face and to whip them?
Not that I can.
Stoning.
No, it's
right?
stoning.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the punishment for adultery is stoning.
Yeah.
So he asked them. So Muhammad asked them the question: "Is that how you find it in the Torah?" They say
they
yes.
said yes. Yeah.
Okay, so they're lying.
Yeah.
So then Muhammad called one of their scholars, so a Jewish scholar, a rabbi,
Mm-hmm.
and in other hadith it says his name was Abdullah ibn Salam, who was a rabbi who converted to Islam. So, and he said to the Jewish scholar, I adjure you by Allah who sent down the Torah to Musa, to Moses, is this how you find the punishment for zina in your book? He said, no. Had you not adjured me by Allah, I would not have told you. It's kind of funny. If you didn't make me swear by God,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have told you the truth. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so then it says, we find that the punishment is stoning, but it became, this is actually gets funny. It became common among our nobles, so if we caught a noble, we would let him go. But if we caught a lowly person, we would carry out the punishment on him. We said, come, let us agree on something that we can impose on noble and lowly alike. So we made the punishment of blackening the face and whipping instead of stoning. So in other words, look, this is what happened. While it says stoning as the punishment in the Torah, well, lots of our friends in the elite class, the upper class, kept committing adultery and fornication. It became common among us, so we just let them go. We didn't because we didn't want to punish our friends, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So, but the lowly person, when we caught them, we would carry out the punishment. But because we didn't want to show partiality, what we did was we just made a punishment that would be agreeable for everybody. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's a lesser punishment, namely blackening the face and whipping.
Yeah.
So in other words, what does it show you? That the rabbis, according to the hadith, were not sincere with following the Torah that they had.
Yeah.
They distorted the Torah in the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Notice it's not in the text.
Yeah, the text hasn't been
didn't
corrupted. It was their interpretation of the text, but the text is true.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so in one sense, what they're teaching about it is distorted. Also, they're not obeying it.
Yeah.
Okay? So then it says, the messenger of Allah said, O Allah, I am the first to revive your command, which they have made dead. So Muhammad is saying, look, I'm reviving the command in the Torah. I follow the Torah better than you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm more in line with the Torah than you rabbis who are distorting the teaching. Then he ordered that he be stoned, and Allah revealed, O messenger, let not those who hurry to fall into disbelief grieve you. If you are given this, then take it. And then notice this is a quotation from Surah 5, verse 41, which is a couple of verses from before what we read from verse 43.
Yeah.
And then it just quotes other verses, 44, 45, 47. So this is telling us this is the occasion these verses were revealed, was in this circumstance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, affirming
so
that the scriptures are true.
I'm going to read. Say that again?
Yeah, affirming that the scriptures are true, that it hasn't been corrupted. The Hebrew scriptures haven't been corrupted by that point.
Okay, so now hold on. Let's steel man it a bit. So what is a Muslim going to say to that? Are they going to say, well, here's the verse, 543. Why did they come to you for judgment when they already have the Torah containing God's judgment? Then they turn away after all. They are not true believers. So I've heard, the best answer I've heard from Muslims to try to say, well, if I say, so was the Torah reliable or unreliable in the time of Muhammad according to this? The obvious thing would seem to be that it's reliable. Right?
Yeah, because that's the authority.
So they're going to say, well, if they're difficult or they know more, then they might say, well, it doesn't say it's all reliable. It doesn't say it's reliable. It's saying, think of it this way. It's like, okay, you claim to be following the Torah. Okay, the Torah that you have. Okay, bring your Torah. Let's see what it has to say. Let's see if you're following it. So in other words, it's used for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Not actually that it is reliable or the same as the original. But like you're saying you're following what you have, but are you even following what you have? Okay. Now that's a great idea of a response, but the problem is what it says in the verse. So it doesn't just say that they're insincere. It says when they already have the Torah, and then this key phrase, containing God's judgment.
Yeah.
So it contains Allah's judgment. It doesn't
ownership.
It's not that it's corrupted. Okay. So they're not following God's judgment, which is in the Torah.
Yeah.
in the 7th century. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting point.
Now we're going to go on to the next verse, which is very key, and people don't know this argument. This needs to become more known. Okay. This is something that I was able to discover myself. So this verse, people read it and they focus on the wrong thing. So it says, "Indeed, we revealed the Torah." So we, as Allah, revealed the Torah.
Yeah.
And that would obviously be to Moses originally, containing guidance and light, which the prophets who submitted themselves to Allah made judgment for the Jews. So too did the rabbis and scholars judge according to Allah's book, with which they were entrusted and of which they were made keepers. So do not fear the people, fear me, nor trade my revelations for fleeting gain. And those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed are truly the disbelievers. Okay. Now, clearly, this is talking about the Torah still. It's clearly, especially with the final statement of the verse, it's emphasizing that it was reliable for at least this judgment. So we can say at least the law code is reliable, right?
Yeah.
In that time. Also, what's the other thing that we established was reliable? Do you remember?
So the law code.
From the first verse we looked at.
Remind me. Sorry.
7:157 was says that Muhammad is prophesied in the Torah.
Yeah. He was prophesying. Okay.
So we've got the
Same
law
page.
code and we've got the prophecies of Muhammad. Okay, are supposedly reliable in the time of Muhammad in the Torah. But now let's go back here for a second. Okay, it says we revealed the Torah, so that's to Moses. Notice this: by which the prophets who submitted themselves to Allah made judgments for the Jews. So the prophets, now keep in mind, we are interpreting this as Muslims.
Yeah.
Because we have to understand what is the Islamic view. So from an Islamic viewpoint, the prophets were using the Torah for judgment. Now, these prophets using the Torah, were they before or after Moses? They have to be after, right? Because they're using the Torah.
Yeah,
so
the
Torah has
the
to
law.
be given first. Okay, so they're using the Torah for judgment among the Jews. Now, a question we might ask is, when were the prophets according to Islam? So I'm going to show you this verse in Surah 2, verse 87. And it says, "Indeed, we gave Moses the book and sent after him successive messengers." Okay, and we gave, and it goes on to talk about Jesus, and we gave Jesus, son of Mary, clear proofs, and support him with the Holy Spirit, etc. Okay, so what we need to see here is that after Moses, there were successive messengers until Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, a simple thing is, from Moses to Jesus, there were always messengers or prophets that Allah, according to Islam, that Allah sent to Bani Israel, the children of Israel. A lot of Muslims will explain, basically saying one of the amazing favors that Allah gave to Israel was that he always gave them prophets.
Yeah.
They never had a time when they didn't have a prophet. Okay? So what we see from here, this is one verse, and there are other verses we could look at, but for the sake of time, okay, we see essentially that we call it an unbreakable chain from Moses to Jesus. There were prophets sent to Israel. Now, coming back here to verse 5, verse 44, the prophets made judgments for the Jews using the Torah. Now, according to Islam, do prophets sin?
No, they're like basically morally perfect, right?
Yeah, they're basically morally perfect. Now, there are some differences in Islamic opinion, but overall, they are virtually sinless. Some would say they are sinless. Others would say they can make mistakes, okay, but they can't really commit deliberate sin. And certainly not a major sin.
Yeah.
And certainly not after they become a prophet.
Yeah.
Okay? So if they are a prophet, they can't commit a major sin deliberately.
Yeah.
Now the question is, could a prophet, and from an Islamic point of view, corrupt the text of the scriptures?
No.
No, right?
Yeah.
Because they're basically perfect, right?
Yeah.
So would it be a minor sin or major sin to corrupt the book? from God.
Yeah, that'd be a major,
Yeah,
it'd be a
exactly.
major sin.
Okay,
That's not
so
just a little whoopsie.
okay, so let's see this here from an Islamic point of view. Then, from Moses to Jesus, you have a perfect transmission of the text of the Torah, because it's under the care of the prophets who are sinless.
Mm.
And then it goes on to say, so too did the rabbis and scholars judge according to Allah's book. Now, they judged, so notice this, the comparison, so too.
Mm-hmm.
So they're being compared, parallel with the prophets. Now, they're not sinless prophets, but their job is the same, and they're being parallel with them. And they judged according to what? They judged according to Allah's book.
Yeah. They're
Not
just
the
taking
corrupted
his.
book.
Yeah, exactly. It's his ownership.
Okay.
It's his authority.
Okay, so, and to make it even clear, so we're going to go down a little bit. We're going to go down to verse 45, keeps talking about the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to go to verse 46. Then in the footsteps of the prophets, we sent Jesus, son of Mary, confirming the Torah revealed before him. So in the footsteps of the prophets and the rabbis, by implication in the context also,
Mm-hmm.
we sent Jesus confirming the Torah. So from Moses to Jesus, there were always prophets using the Torah, and Jesus came along confirming the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any hint in here that there was a change or any significant tampering of the Torah in this time?
No.
No, obviously not, right?
Mm-mm.
So now we don't focus on the gospel. This is the problem that the Islamic dilemma focuses on. What the Christian apologists do is they focus on the rest of this verse, and we gave the Injil, the gospel containing guidance and light, confirming what was revealed before. And then they read verse 47. So let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, clearly it is put in parallel as with the Torah. It is basically being treated the same way. But the problem is, what is the Injil according to Muslims?
Yeah, they don't believe it's been revealed. Yeah. The one we have today, right, is not the same.
Really clear. And actually, I recently watched a Muslim reacting to some of these recent Islamic dilemma videos.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a really solid point that I hadn't thought of before. So he made the point that, okay, so obviously we don't believe as Christians, this isn't his point yet, but obviously we don't believe that the four gospel accounts, the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, came after another book that Jesus wrote. Right? So we don't believe that Jesus ever wrote a book called the Injil or the Gospel. And then okay, we believe that the original written gospel was in four accounts. Yeah. Right? So, but here it's gospel singular, not plural. But now someone will say, well, a Christian will say, well, but the gospel in the time of Muhammad was like, it's obviously not what the Muslims are thinking, which is a book by Jesus. It's obviously the fourfold gospel that Christians have always had. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the gospel in the time of Muhammad, which is what this is talking about, well, the gospel in the time of Jesus, and then by implication the time of Muhammad, fine. I agree. The Quran is talking about the gospel also in the time of Muhammad, but the problem is the reason, one of like an airtight reason why Muslims cannot accept that the Injil refers to the fourfold gospel is because it didn't come directly from Jesus. It came from people who were not prophets, according to Christians.
That's their hang up.
So, because we're going to say they're apostles, right?
Yeah.
Or actually, a Christian could say the apostles are prophets in one sense, right? Like, they're given the spirit of prophecy, the Holy Spirit,
entrusted,
and He guides them along. And sure, but the question is, even if we're going to call them prophets in a sense, okay? Sure, because we believe that it's inspired by God, etc. But from a Muslim point of view, do the Muslims accept the apostles of Isa as prophets? They don't.
No.
So if we're going to say it belongs to people that they don't accept as prophets, as the ones through whom it came, they're going to automatically say that's not the book. Yeah. Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this undermines the ability to use the Injil, but I'm going to say we shouldn't use it anyway because the Injil is going to get us the theological issues, okay? So, and that's what we don't want to focus on. Okay, so let's move on to the other thing I was going to share here. stop sharing now. We're going to go to the presentation.
Yeah, and these are the discrepancies right now in the Old Testament.
Well, I want to share 2 more verses, and then we're going to go to the story.
Yeah, so we know from everything that you've told us so far if you're following along, that the scriptures, if a Muslims say that it's been corrupted, we showed in the Qur'an how we can know that from Moses to Jesus that it's always been affirmed, and then ultimately to Muhammad that these scriptures have been affirmed, and also it's the authority given by Allah to be able to judge that. So it hasn't been corrupted the time from Adam from Moses to Muhammad. Interesting.
Actually, I need to, since given what you said, I want to share one more verse from that website.
Yeah.
So, share that screen again. So, in Surah 5, another verse that a lot of Christians use, which is a good verse, but is misused.
Yeah.
So, in Surah 5, verse 68, okay, so it says, "Say, O Prophet, O people of the book, you have nothing to stand unless you observe the Torah, the gospel, and what has been revealed to you from your Lord." So here we see 3 things being referred to: the Torah, the gospel, and then the phrase "what has been revealed to you from your Lord" refers to the Quran. Okay, so Muhammad is being told to tell the Jews and the Christians, the people of the book, you have nothing to stand unless you observe the Torah, the gospel, and the Quran. Okay, now what do Christian apologists usually say here? It's saying that, see, the Torah and the gospel were authoritative in the time of Muhammad and need to be followed. Well, okay, it's not authoritative for everybody, because according to Islamic teaching, the Torah was given specifically to the Jews and only authoritative for them. And then the Christians, which somehow is a different group in their mind, okay, instead of just Jews and then believing Gentiles.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but then the Injil, the gospel, is another book that only applies to the Christians, or is only authoritative for them. So the Torah is not authoritative for the Christians.
Gotcha.
The gospel is not authoritative for the Jews.
2 different things they're saying.
But the Quran is the first universal book. Okay, and it is to be followed by everyone. That's the Islamic claim. And I need to show this to you as well, so people make sure they understand. Okay, so in Surah 2, verse 91, this is in the context is talking about the Jews, and it says, "When it is said to them, the Jews, believe in what Allah has revealed, namely the Quran."
Yeah.
They, the Jews, reply, "We only believe what was sent down to us, namely the Torah." So they're told to believe in the Quran. They say, "We believe only what's been sent to us, which is the Torah." They're told to believe the Quran. They're saying, "We're only going to believe the Torah." And they deny what came afterwards, namely the Quran, though it is the truth confirming their own scriptures. And again, it's literally what was with them. "Ask them, O Prophet, why then did you kill Allah's prophets before, if you are truly believers?" Okay, so what is the meaning of this verse? So it's saying, think of it this way. It's saying about the Jews that the Jews who were rejecting the Quran in the 7th century, they were saying, we don't need another book. We already got a book. Thank you. We got enough. Okay. We'll just follow our book. You know, maybe you can follow your book, but we're not going to follow your book. We're going to follow our book.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Remember, Surah 7, 157 said that Muhammad was prophesied in their book. Okay, so are they able to follow their book if they're not going to accept Muhammad? No, they got to accept Muhammad because he's prophesied in the Torah.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously I don't think he actually is, but according to the Quran, he is.
Yeah.
So so the Quranic perspective is this is like, think as a Christian, Jesus is prophesied, the Messiah is prophesied to be a suffering servant in Isaiah 53 in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So can a Jew legitimately say, I don't want to accept the New Testament or your Messiah Jesus that you guys follow as Christians. I'll follow my Tanakh, my Hebrew Bible. Thank you. Okay, and can they be faithful in following the Hebrew Bible without accepting Jesus the Messiah?
No.
because he's prophesied in it.
Yeah, because it's
So it's the same concept. The Quran is saying Muhammad is prophesied in the Torah, and the Jews are saying, we don't need Muhammad or your new book, thank you. We've got our Torah, we'll follow that. But the point is they're insincere because they're not really following it, because if they did follow it,
so testifies
then
about
they would accept Muhammad in the Quran.
It's funny, even the argument in the Quran is much like what Jesus even, convicts the Pharisees of, like how, oh, Jerusalem, how you've killed the prophets and how I've wanted to bring you under my wings like a mother. It's interesting. It's almost same verbiage that they're using and making a claim.
I will say, one of the things that I agree with the Quran on is its condemnation of the rabbis. So the rabbis were distorting and still are distorting the Torah. So I agree with them. They're not changing the text, but they're distorting the teaching for sure.
Oh yeah.
In many, many ways. And a lot of Christians don't know what the rabbis do. So I'm going to say with Muhammad, I agree with you that, and the Quran, I agree with you that the rabbis were distorting the Torah. But unfortunately, because Muhammad was illiterate, he couldn't actually check the Torah himself and know that actually a lot of those distortions ended up in the Quran. Okay? Because he heard the stories and had it incorporated. Yeah. Okay. Obviously, I'm giving my personal opinion and my conclusion, not what I'm going to share with the Muslim at that stage. Yeah. Okay. So, but the point is, I want you to see in Surah 5:68 that I was just showing you before, when it says you have nothing to stand on unless you stand on the Torah, the Gospel, and the Quran. Yeah. It's not saying that the Torah is authoritative for Muslims to follow. It's not. Because Muslims are followers of Muhammad. After the time of Muhammad, they only need to follow the Quran. Okay, because that's the only universal book, and it essentially abrogates the previous scriptures. It replaces them. Yeah. They like to say it's like the new iPhone. Yeah. Okay, so they got the updated version. Why do I need an old version that no longer applies? Yeah. Okay. So now what I will say is, although the Torah is not universally authoritative, it was authoritative for the Jews up until the time of Muhammad.
Because they were supposed to, and I've heard people make that argument. I've heard a Muslim make that argument where who knows her understanding. It was on TikTok that I saw, but basically she was like, well, all the Jews, when Muhammad came, they were supposed to make that transfer. Like it's almost like a chain, and they were supposed to now go and believe in Muhammad because it testified about him. So it's like this chain of like piggybacking.
And that's a very good point, is that's exactly affirming our case. Yeah. Because it's just the right understanding of the Quran. The right understanding of the Quran is going to be a problem for them. Because what it's affirming is the reliability of the text of the Torah. I'm going to say in general, but even if I don't say in general, even the things that I can specifically say that I can show, namely, so far we said the law code and prophecies of Muhammad in the time of Muhammad, that's all I need. Yeah. And I can falsify the Quran. But now I'm going to show you the last thing before we get into some of the stories. Yeah. Okay. And this is the presentation. So Surah 10, verse 94 is one that some Christian apologists should know. So it says, if you, O Prophet, are in doubt about these stories that we have revealed to you, then ask those who read the scripture before you. Okay, so let's unpack this statement. And unfortunately, like if I was doing it's better to have it open and looking at the book with Muslims and look at the context. But I'm just gonna get to the point. Christians misrepresent this verse when they talk about this is saying, see, Muhammad was doubting. Because they say, see, you, O Prophet, that's in brackets, so that means it's not in the Arabic, but it's singular in the Arabic, so it's referring to Muhammad. Okay, Muhammad is being addressed. So it's Allah speaking, addressing Muhammad. If you are in doubt, okay, well, the problem, though, is according to Islamic theology, Muhammad can't be in doubt as a prophet. Okay. So Muslims will never accept that interpretation. Okay. So now a Christian, if you want to focus on that issue, you're not going to win on that issue, and you're going to be seen by Muslims as distorting. You're basically being uncharitable with the text, and you're trying to make it say something it doesn't say.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't need it to be about Muhammad doubting, and I would actually say that the Muslims are correct. The context of this is not about Muhammad doubting. It's about the original audience of the Quran. So here it's saying that these verses in the context in the Quran that are being revealed to an audience, right? The original audience of the Quran, not Muhammad, but it's being conveyed through Muhammad as the vessel. So these verses, so the people hearing this, meaning people in the 7th century, okay, hearing Muhammad convey the verses, if you're in doubt, and notice it says in brackets, so this is the clear Quran, Mustafa Khattab, the translator, he supplies these stories, okay, as the context. If you're in doubt about these stories that we have revealed to you, then ask those who read the scripture before you.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm talking to a Muslim in person, I always recommend have a physical copy of the clear Quran. Okay. Actually, I can actually do this. I'll show it to you by sharing a different screen. And I'm going to show you because I have it in PDF of where it has headings. So what I would show them is headings in the clear Quran. And here it is. So we're going to go to Surah 10. Okay, I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger for you guys.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. And we're gonna go to our verse 94. Okay, so that's what we're reading. Now you notice the clear Quran has headings.
Yeah.
Right? Now if we go back to the section starting at 71, I'll just tell them read the headings from 71 until we get to our verse in 94. It says Noah and his people. Okay. And then we see messengers after Noah. We see Moses and Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we keep going, it's still about them. And then we see the end of Pharaoh, verses 90 to 92. And then in 93, it says, indeed, we settled the children of Israel in the blessed land.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, what do we have? Stories about Noah and Moses up until the settling in the promised land. And then we get this verse.
Yeah.
If you, O prophet, are in doubt about these stories. Well, of course, Mustafa Khattab translating it, he supplies the context. It's about stories about the prophets.
Yeah.
Specifically about Noah and Moses and Pharaoh. So let me ask you, Alex, where do you read in the Old Testament about Noah and Moses and Pharaoh?
That's in Genesis. I mean, Genesis, Exodus, and yeah, it's the Pentateuch.
Exodus, so that's part of the Torah, right? Okay, so who are they going to ask in verse 94?
The people of the book, the Torah, the Jews.
Yeah, the Jews, because it's stories from the Torah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the context. So in other words, the stories in the Torah in the time of Muhammad were also reliable.
Yeah.
So now we got
further proving it. Yeah.
Okay, the law code, prophecies of Muhammad, and stories.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to show you, since I'm just in here, I'll just do it in here. In Surah 12, and it should pop up for you here as it's lagging. Okay, and we'll see just below this verse highlighted there. It says, this is the last verse of Surah 12, Surah Yusuf, and this is after a long chapter, long surah that tells the full story of Joseph. And it says, in their stories, there is truly a lesson for people of reason. Now, in the context, in their stories, I want you to see this. It says the messengers in the previous verse.
Yeah.
So in their stories is about the messengers and prophets. So in the stories of the prophets and messengers, there is truly a lesson for people of reason. This message, which refers to the Quran, so the Quran cannot be a fabrication. Why can the Quran not be a fabrication? Because it's a confirmation of previous revelation, a detailed explanation of all things, a guide and a mercy for people of faith. It is a confirmation of the previous scriptures, in particular, the stories of the prophets in the Quran.
Yeah.
The Quran's version of its account of the stories of the prophets confirm the previous scriptures.
Yeah.
And even in detail.
Mm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is what you need to see is the Quran is specific. It's not just in general. I don't even need to say the whole Torah in every aspect is uncorrupted. I just give me these three things, thank you. Okay? And frankly, if they're really difficult, I don't even need all three.
Yeah.
Okay? But what I need, so stories of the prophets, law, code, and prophecies of Muhammad. You see that?
Yep.
From what we looked at. Okay. So
The
now
big
let's
three.
look at. Oh, I think I just lost my laptop there. I'm gonna have to rejoin it. If you can let that back in.
Yep. Gotcha.
Okay, and I'm gonna share screen. Mute myself. Okay, share screen. I'll get back here. The PowerPoint.
Perfect. I got it. And now here is the stories of those prophets that are supposed to be in detail and confirming what had already been written, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, so these are basically, I want to give you an overview of where we would go with the five main points in our methodology that we go through. The first one we've just gone through, essentially. I need to mention one more thing, actually. So the first thing is that the Torah was corrupted. So that's these are five major claims that Islam makes. We call these the real 5 pillars of Islam. Okay?
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is we're going to dismantle each of these real 5 pillars to show ultimately that Islam and the Quran are false.
Yeah.
So the first pillar is that the Bible, and specifically we're talking about the Torah, was corrupted. Okay? We've just gone and addressed that issue. The second is that God authored both the Quran and the Torah.
Yep.
We're going to go there next with stories. The third is that Abraham and Ishmael traveled to Mecca and built the Kaaba. This pillar actually is probably the most important. Okay? They believe that the Kaaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael. And this is what legitimizes and establishes Islam as a religion, because it's saying that the Kaaba, which they face for their prayers, was established by God as the first house of God. So for us, we're going to say, what is the first house of God? Built by Solomon.
Yeah, it's Solomon.
Okay, the temple. But for them, they'd say before the first house of God was the real first house of God. Okay?
Yeah,
before the first temple was the original temple, actually, in built by Abraham and Ishmael in Mecca. So if God actually established that as the way to be worshipped, then we should be doing it that way.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so that's what they believe. But that's not what the Torah is going to say, right? And so number 4, they claim that that Ishmael was the father of the Arabs, and I need to be specific, the father of the Arabs of the Meccan region, okay, and especially the Quraysh tribe from which Muhammad descended.
Yeah.
So Ishmael was the father of the Arabs in Mecca, and Muhammad was a descendant of Ishmael and thereby inherited prophethood from Abraham.
Interesting.
Now, not simply because he was a descendant, but if he was not a descendant of Ishmael, he could not have. Okay, so it's a necessary condition. 5, and lastly, that we focus on at the core of our method is that Muhammad received his revelation patterned after the same way as Moses received his revelation. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, these are things that people are not really talking about.
Yeah.
But these are actually the real issues that need to be discussed.
Yeah.
And, I went there. Wrong direction. Okay. Yeah, and this is what we get into. So, let me get to where it says the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here it is. So, once we show them the verses in the Quran about the Torah, then we're going to ask them a question, have you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Now, some Muslims have. Most Muslims actually have not even heard of them, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, major archaeological find starting in the 1940s. And so we just explained to them some of the facts about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that, there was about 1,000 texts that were discovered. Among them, many portions, not complete copies, fragmentary portions of every book of the Hebrew Old Testament, with the exception of Esther and Nehemiah. And here is an example. This is a booklet from, you can't really see it very clearly, but it's in the faded black on the booklet.
Mm-hmm.
It's from the Royal Ontario Museum
Hmm.
when they were on exhibit between 2009 2010. And so this booklet was to provide some information about it. So this is not a Christian booklet. It's not an apologetics booklet. It's just facts. And this is a page that talks about one fragment from the book of Genesis.
Hmm.
And it says, you can see at the underline, that the date of this fragment is from 125 BC to 100 BC.
Hmm. That's crazy.
Okay, so that's much older than Muhammad.
Yeah.
Okay, but even older than Jesus.
Yeah.
So before there were any Christians, we have text samples of the text from the Torah, even before the time of Jesus.
Wow.
Okay, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it says in this underline, I know we're cutting it off a little bit, but it says the copies of Genesis among the Dead Sea Scrolls are extremely similar to the traditional Hebrew text. Key phrase, extremely similar. Now, we're not saying it's identical. Now, there are some slight differences here and there, but overall, it is basically the same text. Okay, as the traditional Hebrew text, which is like Codex Leningradensis from 1009 AD. So this text is like 1100 years older than the oldest complete copy of the Hebrew Old Testament we had in our possession before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Okay, so this corroborates the reliability of the transmission in general, and in particular, certainly any portion that's present in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do observe. So when we're looking at our modern English Bibles, not our Old English ones, modern English Bibles are based on the best of manuscripts. And so that includes the oldest manuscripts like this. We also have this Greek Septuagint, manuscripts of the Old Testament in translation, but it's still affirming the basic text that's there being translated, also before the time of Muhammad, okay, in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. So when we open our modern English Bibles, we're using among what we're translating from, that scholars translate from, is the earliest text. Okay, so we're basically can open and read it. So that's what we then do. And the first story we're going to compare is here. And this is now addressing the second pillar. Okay, so we're going to look at the story of Joseph, and this is where it really matters in the details of the stories. Because remember, what did the Quran claim in Surah 12, 111?
That it affirms everything that came before it, all the details, all the stories.
In particular, about the stories of the prophets.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So wherever there's a story of a prophet that is parallel with the stories in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, we can check. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So here we have this story from Genesis 37, where Joseph is thrown into the well by his brothers, and then he's also sold into slavery. So with that story in mind, we start with the Quranic version.
Mm-hmm.
We start with the Quran. And it says, then they returned to their father. So the brothers, this is verse 16 in Surah 12. The brothers returned to their father in the evening weeping. They cried, our father, we went racing and left Joseph with our belongings, and a wolf devoured him. But you will not believe us, no matter how truthful we are. And they brought his shirt stained with false blood. He responded, no, your souls must have tempted you to do something evil, so I can only endure with beautiful patience. It is Allah's help that I seek to bear your claims. So,
much different.
Brothers bring the bloody shirt. They say, you're not going to believe us, but this is Joseph's shirt. He was eaten by a wolf. And Jacob, their father, how does he react?
He's like, I don't believe you.
I don't believe you. So if he doesn't believe their claim that Joseph was killed by a wild animal, what does he think Joseph is dead or alive?
He thinks he's alive.
Yeah. And in fact, if you read later, I don't think I have it pulled up here, but if you read later in the same narrative in Surah 12, when Jacob is sending his sons back to Egypt, because it has the full story essentially, as we have in Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
where the brothers go down to Egypt to get food during the famine.
Yeah.
When Jacob sends his sons back down to Egypt, he says, also search for Joseph. Okay, so Jacob
So he's
in the
aware.
Quran, all throughout the Quranic narrative, believes that Joseph is alive.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at Genesis. In Genesis 37, verse 33 and following, it says, actually, let's go to 32. The brothers, just before the highlight, they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. He identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol, that's the realm of the dead. I'll go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. You see a difference?
Very different. They had given him the robe, and then he was the one who made the assumption. In the other account, they were the one that made the claim rather than letting their dad come to that assumption. And in here, he believed that he was dead.
Yep.
Yeah. So very two opposing views.
Yeah, completely opposite. And I like that you also noted that the way they even presented the shirt was different, what they claimed or didn't claim.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's actually a lot of differences just in these couple verses.
Yeah.
If you look at it long enough and examine it. So you already notice a few.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely opposite. So they're not, you can't harmonize it.
No.
Right?
But it's
So
supposed
these
to
are just
confirm all of
contradictory
that.
claims.
Yeah.
That's right. It should confirm all of it, but it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So the second pillar that we're examining is that the Quran claims that the author of the Torah and the author of the Quran are the same author.
Yeah.
So are they?
No.
Right. So because we got the same story told in opposite ways, we see it's not coming from the mind of the same author. Okay? So are they the same story? No. Do these stories come from the same author? No. Okay, we're going to go on to the other stories because I want to make sure we get in a bunch. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the next pillar, we're going to go to the third one, the question about Abraham and Ishmael. So did they travel to Mecca and build the Kaaba? So we asked them that question, and we ask it to them instead of pointing to a source, because what we're going to use for our sources, not necessarily every Muslim is going to agree on all sources outside the Quran. We are going to use some hadith to talk about this issue, but some of the essential elements in the hadith are in the Quran itself. Okay? But instead of getting into an argument about the reliability of a hadith, we're going to ask them personally, what do they believe? And they're all going to answer in the same way. Do you believe that Abraham and Ishmael traveled to Mecca and that they built the Kaaba? Okay. Now, we don't mean did they build it when they went on their first trip. We just mean did they both end up going there and end up at some point building the Kaaba? And they're going to say yes. So here's a map of Saudi Arabia, or the peninsula, and we see Mecca is, if you look at the very middle of the peninsula on the west side.
Yeah.
You can see Mecca there in the middle. And then you see at the top on the west side is Israel, Jordan. Yeah. Okay, so Abraham lived in the region on this map called Israel. Not going to get into a political debate. Okay, but all right. So he lived in what was at that time Canaan.
Yeah.
And Mecca is way down there. Okay, that's Mecca and where the Kaaba is. So these are the sources that we would use for this conversation. We're going to use one main hadith that tells the story, the Islamic claim of this story we're going to examine. Then we're going to compare it with the Torah, namely Genesis. And I'm going to summarize it for you, but I'm going to read just a little bit. I'm going to summarize it just for the sake of time.
Yeah.
So this is from Sahih Bukhari 3364. This, I'm going to say, you need to know, if you only need to know one hadith, this is the hadith you need to know to talk to Muslims, okay?
Yeah.
All All right. So it's a very long hadith narration, but you need to know what it said there in terms of the story that's being told.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see here it says the first lady to use a girdle was the mother, i.e., Hagar of Ishmael. She used a girdle so that she might hide her tracks from Sarah. Abraham brought her, that's Hagar, and her son Ishmael while she used to nurse him at her breast, to a place near the Kaaba under a tree on the spot of Zamzam, at the highest place in the mosque. During those days there was nobody in Mecca, nor was there any water. Okay, let me explain it. So when it says he brought them there, it doesn't mean that the things that it says are there, the Kaaba, the Zamzam well, the mosque, it doesn't mean that those things were there at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It means he brought them to the place where those things would eventually be.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's giving the person in the time of Muhammad, when the hadith is being told, when Muhammad talked about this, he's telling them, so where the Kaaba is, this is where Abraham brought Hagar and baby Ishmael, because he's a nursing infant, and he brought them there. But at the time, it says, during those days, there was nobody in Mecca, nor was there any water. So he made them sit over there and placed near them a leather bag containing some dates and a small water skin containing some water, and set out homeward. So Abraham leaves them in Mecca where nobody lived. This is a barren wilderness in a valley. There's no city, there's no well, there's nothing, okay?
Yeah.
So he leaves his wife Hagar and his nursing infant Ishmael there, and leaves them with a water skin and some dates. They run out of that water, and then it says you can see here, she repeated that running between Safa and Marwa 7 times. So she runs frantically between the 2 hills in the valley, one called Marwa, one called Safa, back and forth 7 times, trying to look for help, because they run out of water and they're going to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at the bottom paragraph there, it says, "Behold, she saw an angel at the place of Zamzam digging the earth." So God sends the angel Gabriel, who digs a well for them, and then she drank from that water and suckled Ishmael, so now they're able to survive. And if you look at the bottom paragraph, you'll see the tribe of Jorham. So she lived there at the well, and it says she lived in that way till some people from the tribe of Jorham passed by her and her child, and as the Jorham people, were coming through the way of Kedah, they landed in the lower part of Mecca, and they saw a bird that had the habit of flying around water and not leaving it. So they thought, okay, well, you see birds flying around, they must be circling for some reason. So they send scouts to check what's over there, and that brings their scouts over to Hagar and baby Ishmael at the well, the Zamzam well, that the angel Gabriel opened. Okay, and then they basically say, oh, there's water here now we can live here. So they ask permission from Hagar, can we move in and live here with you at the well in Mecca? So this actually is the Islamic account where the civilization of Mecca came from. It's because Abraham brought Hagar and Ishmael down there, and the angel opened the well, and now it's a habitable region, and so the tribe of Jorham moves in, and they live together. Okay, not Abraham, because he went back to Canaan.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says they settled there, and as you see, it says, and later on they sent for their families who came and settled with them, so that some families became permanent residents there. The child, Ishmael, grew up and learned Arabic from them. So if you learned Arabic from them, they were already Arabic speaking. So you already have Arabs living before the time of Ishmael. So he's not the father of all Arabs, by the way.
Yeah, that's
even
another
according
point.
to Islam.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he learned Arabic from him, and his virtues caused them to love and admire him as he grew up. And when he reached the age of puberty, key thing, they made him marry a woman from amongst them. After Ishmael's mother had died, Abraham came after Ishmael's marriage in order to see his family that he had left long ago. But he did not find Ishmael there. And then it goes on to tell more of a story. So let's make sure we're following. So the tribe of Jorham moves in as an Arab tribe, teaches Ishmael Arabic as he grows up, because he grows up from infancy in an Arab tribe, the tribe of Jorham. And at the age of puberty, they arrange a marriage for him from one of the women of the tribe of Jurhum. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we go back here. So here it is. So then Abraham stayed away from them for a period as long as Allah wished and called on them afterwards. He saw Ishmael under a tree near Zamzam sharpening his arrows. So this gives the account. It's the same hadith where it's saying, this is the time when Abraham first saw his son Ishmael after he had left him since infancy. Okay. And then it goes on to say that God ordered him to build a house here, meaning the Kaaba. So then Ishmael and Abraham build the house. So that's essentially the hadith that then we would compare with Genesis. So let me make sure we're understanding. What is this account about? This is the account about the time when Hagar and Ishmael separated from Abraham.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Torah, we have an account of Hagar and Ishmael separating from Abraham. But any Christian who knows their Genesis, okay, knows that that is not the account. Okay, but we're going to look at what Genesis says about that story because that's the parallel account. So for the context, we first look at Genesis 17. This is the larger context, and it says in Genesis 17, if you read verse 24 and 25, Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And he also circumcised all the male members of his household on the same day. Okay, so Genesis 17 says, key thing is 2 ages. Abraham's age when he was circumcised and Ishmael's age, 99 and 13. 20 verse 1 tells us where they were living at the time, which at the end of the verse it says he sojourned in Gerar. Okay. 21 is the main passage that we compare. This is the story of the account of the separation. In verse 5, sorry, it's not the highlighted, but in verse 5, it says, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born to him. And I want us to do the math, simple math. How old was Ishmael when Abraham was circumcised?
Oh, well, 99. Yeah, 99 and 13. Abraham was
99 and 13. So now Abraham is 100 when Isaac is born. So how old is Ishmael?
14.
14, good. Now verse 8, the boy, that's Isaac, grew and he was weaned. Now question, approximately how old would Isaac be when he was weaned?
The boy, I'm not sure. When he was weaned.
So approximately 2 to 3 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't know exact timing, but
yeah.
In general, we see in ancient texts it would be about 2 to 3. You know, they don't have formula. You got to breastfeed as long as you can. Okay, so if he's 2 or 3, how old was Ishmael?
Then he would be, he was just like 16, 15, 16?
Yeah, 16 or 17.
Yeah, 16, 17.
14 when he's born, plus 2 or 3, right? Okay, so then it says in end of verse 8, and Abraham made a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had given birth for Abraham, laughing. And she said to Abraham, kick out this maidservant and her son, because the son of this maidservant will not inherit with my son Isaac. And the matter was wrong in the eyes of Abraham on account of his son, meaning Ishmael. And God said to Abraham, do not let it be wrong in your eyes concerning the lad and concerning your maidservant. All that Sarah says to you, listen to her voice, because through Isaac your seed will be called for you. But as for the son of the maidservant, I will make him into a nation, because he is your seed. Here are the key verses, 14 and 15. And Abraham got up early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, setting them on her shoulder. And so with the boy he sent her away. She walked and she wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water from the skin was finished, she dumped the boy under one of the shrubs. She walked and she sat down by herself across from him as far as the bow shot, because she said, I cannot watch the death of the boy. And she sat down across from him. She lifted up her voice and she wept aloud. God heard the voice of the lad, and an angel called to Hagar from the skies and said to her, what is the matter with you, Hagar? Don't be afraid, because God has listened to the voice of the lad over where he was. Stand up, bear up the lad, and hold on to him with your hand, because I will make him into a great nation. God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She walked and filled the skin of water, and she gave it to the lad to drink. Okay, so verses up to verse 19 is where we emphasize. So we saw in verse 14 and 15, where did they wander? In Beersheba.
Yeah.
Right? So they lived in Gerar, and then they left and ended up wandering in Beersheba. So that's where it is. I know it's small on the map.
Yeah.
So Gaza, or I like to say Gerar is basically where Gaza is today. Everybody knows where Gaza is, so or should know, and Beersheba is there. So, the question I then asked them, I showed them a map. This map, and this is a map from a Bible atlas I have that gives a map of Abraham's journeys in Genesis, all the places he goes, and some biblical references. He starts in the east in Mesopotamia, and Ur goes up north to Haran and Syria, down to Canaan, then to Egypt, and back to Canaan. So I asked them, can you show me on this map of Abraham in the Torah where Mecca is on Abraham's map?
It's pretty low.
Of course, it's nowhere on his map because it's not even on the map.
Yeah.
We would need about 2 maps to get it in. Okay, at this size. That's where it would be.
That's crazy.
Okay. 1,350 kilometers south, one way. What was the map before? Was this. Okay, these are completely different areas, completely different distances. And I'll ask you, Alex, how far, according to the Torah, how far did Abraham travel?
Oh, actually, I don't know. You'll have to tell me that one. It was only
in this
within.
Story, how far did he travel?
Remind me. Mine's a little fuzzy.
Okay,
Any more coffee?
I had a really good answer to this question one time where somebody said, I know, it's actually a little bit of a trick question.
Yeah.
So I had one guy answer, it was a great answer. He said, the kitchen.
Yeah, the kitchen.
Okay, because all he did was he packed their bags and sent them off.
Yeah, he didn't. Oh, yeah, he didn't go anywhere. He just packed it, put it on her shoulder, and
right?
sent her off. Yeah.
That's right. So he didn't travel with them. He sent them away in Genesis, in the Torah.
Yeah. So
now they went to Beersheba. Of course, they didn't go to Mecca, but he didn't travel at all with them.
No.
He sent them off. Right? Well, it's very interesting. This is another map from an Islamic atlas that I was able to purchase. And it shows at the top, you can see this kind of upside down U pattern, which is equivalent to the map I showed from the Torah. But then you've got this extra line that goes south to Mecca. Right? So it just copies the biblical map, and then it adds in a journey down to Mecca.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, according to the Torah, though, did Abraham and Ishmael travel to Mecca?
No.
Right. Key phrase, according to the Torah. According to the Torah, did they build the Kaaba?
No.
Right. I mean, if they didn't travel to Mecca, how could they build the Kaaba in Mecca?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So if they didn't build the Kaaba, who did?
Who knows?
Okay. Maybe you don't know the answer to that question. But
the pagans?
According to Islamic source, pagans, because Islamic sources say in the time of Muhammad, in the 7th century, Muhammad cleansed the Kaaba, which was filled with 360 idols.
Yeah.
He removed them. So I'm going to say, amazing job. I agree with you, Muhammad. I'm not for idols either. Thank you for taking them out. But the problem is that he thought he was restoring it to its Abrahamic roots.
Yeah.
Right? But it was never
there.
If Abraham never even went there, he didn't build it. Okay. So then the fourth pillar, which is related, and it's helpful, we are going to use the same hadith, the same story, essentially to compare it. And it's about Abraham and Ishmael again. So the question we're going to ask is, do you believe that Ishmael was the father of the Meccan Arabs and Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael? Now, why this issue is very important is because, as I mentioned before, according to Islamic theology and according to the Qur'an itself, it says that prophethood was given to Abraham and his descendants. So up until Abraham, before Abraham, Others could be prophets. Like Noah's before Abraham, he could be a prophet. There's a couple other Arab prophets before the time of Abraham in the Quran that are not biblical prophets. But after Abraham, prophethood was given to Abraham, to him and his offspring. And because Muhammad was not from Isaac and Jacob, he has to be from Ishmael to be from Abraham.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is basically a question of whether he can qualify. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why this is an important issue for us. Of course, we don't really care. We don't think about Ishmael.
But for them, it's a big deal.
But
yeah,
for them, it's a big deal, right? And for them, it's like obvious. Of course, he's from Ishmael. I mean, why would they think he's from Ishmael? Because Muhammad said so.
Mm-hmm.
But Muhammad said basically the Islamic sources are saying, well, that's also what the Torah said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're confirming it. Supposedly, again, supposed to be confirming the Torah, but it's not there. It's unfounded.
Yeah, and again, confirming it in the stories.
Yep.
So here we go. Stories of the prophets.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we use that same hadith. Okay, I'm not going to reread it. Okay, going back again to Genesis 21. If the screen catches up for us. There it goes. So the last two verses that we didn't read from Genesis 21, 1 to 21, as we look at 20 and 21. God was with the lad, that's Ishmael, as he grew, and he dwelled in the desert and became an expert archer, and he dwelled in the desert of Qur'an, and his mother took for him a wife from the land of Egypt. Now that's interesting. Who did he marry in the hadith?
It was from the Arabs, right?
Yeah, the tribe of Jurhum.
Yeah, the Jurhum. Yeah.
The Arab tribe of Jurhum. Okay. So it's you have to remember that detail. Okay. Now here's interesting. So Genesis 25. Now, of course, if he marries an Egyptian woman, a woman from the land of Egypt, in ancient times, Egyptians are not Arabs.
Yeah.
So he didn't marry an Arab woman. He also didn't marry a woman from Jurhum or from Mecca, according to the Torah. So from the wrong place, from the wrong ethnicity. Okay. And I want to now look more specifically at what the Torah says about where he lived. Okay. So in Genesis 25, we see a few other places in the Torah and the Old Testament that give us more of the geography. So it says in verse 1 in 25, it says that Abraham married a third wife named Keturah. So after Sarah died and Hagar has been sent away, he married this other woman, Keturah. Verse 2, she had 6 children, 6 sons. One of them, to note in verse 2, is named Midian. That's relevant. Okay. Because we're going to see actually the Midianites and Ishmaelites intermingle or interbreed with one another. Go down to verse 5 and 6 that are highlighted. It says, Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, meaning the inheritance. But the sons of his concubines, notice it's plural. So who are those women? It would be Keturah and Hagar. To the sons of Keturah and Hagar, Abraham gave gifts. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac. Where?
East.
Eastward to the east country. Okay. Is Mecca east of Canaan?
No.
No. So this is the map again. East of Canaan is not Mecca. Okay.
That's so
Another verse from the same chapter, 25 verse 18. From 12 to 18, we have the genealogy of the sons of Ishmael. And at the end of that list, verse 18, it says that of the sons of Ishmael, they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt, in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. So coming back to the map again.
Yeah, show us
what direction did verse 6 say? East.
It said east, yeah.
Eastward.
So
opposite
Assyria.
Egypt, east.
Yeah.
In the direction of Assyria. If you look, not Syria, but Assyria.
Assyria, yeah.
The northeast direction. East and northward.
Yeah, it's getting even further away from Mecca.
Yeah, and notice Midian on the map. Okay, Midian. Okay, so as the south side. So next to the Red Sea. So Midian is very northern Arabia. So what we're going to see is actually the Ishmaelites live, because they mix in with the Midianites, their descendants will live between Midian and northward from there on the east side of the Jordan River.
Yeah.
Okay? Because it's in the direction of Assyria.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all east of Egypt as well. So how we're going to see this also is very interesting. What we're going to look at is some corroborating verses outside of the immediate context that become very interesting. So this is back in the story of Joseph when he's sold into slavery that we were looking at before. So it says when the brothers sat down, Joseph is still in the well. They sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of
Ishmaelites.
Ishmaelites coming from where?
Gilead.
Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to
Egypt.
Egypt. Okay, so they're coming from Gilead, going down to Egypt, and they pass through the place where they pick him up is a place called Dothan, which we read earlier in Genesis 37. Okay, and Judah has the idea, let's not kill him, let's sell him into slavery. So verse 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Okay, and if you keep going, it says that they drew him out of the well, and they sell him to the Midianites. It says. Okay, and I think it's verse 28.
Yeah.
Now it's funny because the Midianites are not mentioned before.
Yeah, it says Ishmaelites.
It's talking about the Ishmaelites. But if you look closely, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are used interchangeably in the passage because they're the same people.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now let's look at the geography here. Gilead. This is you have the Jordan River running between the Dead Sea and Sea of Galilee. There, Gilead is on the east side. That's modern day Jordan. They cross westward because they got to go down to Egypt. So they're going to go. Really, it should probably be closer to the Mediterranean Sea, the arrow. Okay, they're going to go through Dothan, and they're going to then go down along the coast to Egypt. Okay, and they go, and there's actually, we know there's an ancient trade route that goes this way. So then they pick up Joseph there, and now I want to look at a question. Or before I show you that, let's be reminded that in Genesis 21 verse 21, it said that Ishmael lived in the desert of Paran.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the question is, where is Paran? So Muslims, what will Muslims say? Do you know what they say?
I'm not sure. They say back in Mecca.
See, this is proof that Ishmael lived in Mecca.
Yeah. Because
Paran is the same as Faran, which there is a Mount Faran in Mecca. So, see, the Torah says that he lived in Faran in Mecca. But here's the problem. That's not what the Torah says.
Yeah.
Numbers. Completely different passage, still in the Torah. This is in the time of Moses. Says, Numbers 13, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of
Paran.
According to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. So the spies go into the land of Canaan. And where did they depart from to go into the land of Canaan? The wilderness of Paran.
Yeah.
Okay, so the congregation of Israel that was wandering in the wilderness, were they wandering in Mecca?
No.
Right, okay. Because remember that big arrow, 1,350 kilometers south?
Yeah.
Okay. That is a very long distance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nowhere near.
When the Israelites exited Egypt and they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, did they go all the way down to Mecca and wander there?
No.
And then decide to send their spies into the land of Canaan to check out the land that's promised to them? That's 1,300 kilometers north of them.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
No.
So end of that passage. They come back. And now before I read this actually, in one of the Islamic sources we read that was telling the account of Abraham traveling to Mecca with Ishmael, it says, well, it's about a 40-day camel journey each way from Canaan to Mecca. So Abraham took 40 days each way on camel to get there. Now, let's look. The spies, if they were sent from Mount Faran in Mecca, At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. Okay, they brought back word to them and to all the congregation, showed them the fruit of the land. Now, I'm not sure if the fruit will last that long.
Yeah.
So, all right, but so 40 days for what? For them to travel into the land, spy out the land, and return.
Yeah.
But it's one way to travel 40 days to get to Mecca from Canaan. So here you need like at least 100 days to travel there, some time in the land to scout it out, and then return. Okay, but you only got 40 days total. They were not there. And also it says Kadesh. So any other place that mentions Kadesh as the location for anything that happens there happened in the wilderness of Paran. Because Kadesh is in the wilderness of Paran, according to the Torah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a map of the spies. And at the bottom of the map is where they come from. Okay, that's Kadesh Barnea.
Yeah.
So Kadesh is there, of course. It's right on the outskirts of the promised land that they're going to inherit. They send them in from the south. Obviously, the congregation of Israel is right there. They're not waiting 1,300 kilometers south like that.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's such a big difference.
So I love Paran because Paran is not like my favorite place in the Bible because it's so obviously so far away from Mecca. It's not Mount Faran that Muslims will say. Okay, so now you're going to have to say at the end of this pillar then, let's have the conclusions. According to the Torah, did Ishmael live anywhere near Mecca? Right? According to the Torah, did Ishmael marry an Arab woman from the tribe of Jurham? According to the Torah, was Muhammad an Ishmaelite? Now, let me make it even clearer. We are not just meaning, was he an Ishmaelite? We are meaning, according to the Islamic narrative. Because, now, somebody might say, well, maybe the Ishmaelites, some generations moved down there and then somehow mixed in with the people there, and then Muhammad came from that. That isn't good enough.
No.
Why is it not good enough? It's very important that we grasp this, because it's not simply that he is a descendant of Ishmael, but that the narrative of Abraham taking baby Ishmael down there with Hagar and later on returning and building the Kaaba, that is the foundational narrative. And that's how he becomes an Ishmaelite, because Ishmael marries into the tribe of Jurham.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not enough that he has a distant, indirect descent going back to Ishmael. It's that Ishmael himself had to go there, because if he didn't go there, he didn't build the Kaaba with Abraham.
Yeah. That's huge.
So the geography and the ancestry are
different,
absolutely intertwined. Lastly, is Islam an Abrahamic religion?
No.
Right, because for it to be an Abrahamic religion, Abraham
to be tied to him.
And Ishmael had to build the Kaaba, and there has to be ancestry for Muhammad.
It's so interesting.
Now, that's very interesting, because what does everybody say? They just grant it to them. Of course, we've got 3 Abrahamic religions. Now, I'm going to actually be fair here, and not necessarily nice, but fair, okay? And the Muslims will appreciate this more. Neither is Rabbinical Judaism an Abrahamic religion. Okay, because Rabbinical Judaism distorts the Torah through all its rabbinical traditions.
It's oral tradition.
And ultimately rejects the Messiah prophesied in their books. So as Christians, as Messianic followers, we're going to say, actually, there's only one Abrahamic religion. And that's the religion of Messianic Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important.
So it's not, it is very important. We also should not have double standards. Okay, because we're not simply saying, is it Abrahamic? Because, of course, we're going to say Jews have ancestry going back to Abraham. Okay, but we're talking about religion here.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about the religion, it doesn't have ancestry going back to Abraham because it's distorted by the rabbis.
Exactly.
Okay, last pillar. So was the source of Muhammad's revelation the same source same as the source of Moses' revelation. Let me say it again. Was the source of Muhammad's revelation the same as the source of Moses' revelation? I mean, did they both get revelation from the same source? Okay. Well, in Sahih Bukhari, let me get here. Hadith number 3. This is the other hadith to know if you're going to know second hadith. Okay. And we're going to read some of it here. So this is the third hadith in Sahih Bukhari's collection, and this is the one that so many Muslims know this account. It's so foundational. It says that the commencement of divine revelation to Allah's messenger, that's Muhammad, was in the form of good, righteous, true dreams which came true like bright daylight. And then the love of seclusion was bestowed upon him. He used to go in seclusion in the cave of Hira. Just need to know that, the cave of Hira, where he used to worship Allah alone continuously for many nights before returning to, or his desire to see, his family. He used to take with him the journey food for the stay and then come back to his wife Khadija to take his food likewise again, till suddenly the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. Okay, pause. Make sure we understand. So he liked to go into seclusion as a religious retreat, and he would go to this cave called the cave of Hira, and he'd stay as long as his food supplies till they ran out, and then he'd go home and get more supplies. So then it says he would do this as a habit until the truth, the revelation, came upon him. And this is the account of the first verses of the Qur'an being revealed to Muhammad. Okay. So the angel came to him and asked him to read. The prophet replied, I do not know how to read. The prophet added, so Muhammad said,
No.
Then the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and again asked me to read, and I replied, I don't know how to read. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it anymore.
Jeez.
Then he released me and again asked me to read. But again I replied, I don't know how to read, or what shall I read? Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said, Read in the name of your Lord who has created all that exists. He has created man from a clot, a piece of thick coagulated blood. Read, and your Lord is the most generous. This statement is from Surah 96, verses 1-3. So these are the first verses that the angel gives to Muhammad as revelation. Then Allah's messenger, so Muhammad, returned with the revelation and with his heart beating severely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I would too. Okay, so then he went to Khadija bint Khuwailid, that's his wife, his only wife at the time, and said, Cover me, cover me. They covered him till his fear was over, and after that he told Khadija everything that had happened and said, I fear that something may happen to me. Khadija replied, Never, by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your kith and kin, help the poor and destitute, serve your guests generously, and assist the deserving calamity afflicted ones. Khadija then accompanied him to her cousin Warqa bin Nawfal, etc., who during the period of ignorance became a Christian and used to write the writing with Hebrew letters. He would write them from the gospel in Hebrew as much as Allah wished him to write. By the way, there's another narration that says that he wrote it in Arabic. Okay. Actually, I discovered fairly recently that at least what I've heard from scholarship is that the Bible, Old and New Testament, were not translated into Arabic at the time. Okay, but Jews who would write in Arabic, because the script was, I think, not yet complete, what they would do is they would use Hebrew characters to write Arabic. So the language would be Arabic, but they would be using the Hebrew alphabet.
Interesting.
So I think what it's saying is he wrote the gospel in Hebrew letters, and that's why other hadith says he wrote in Arabic, which actually tells me maybe he was a Jew, because that's what they did. Okay, so because I mean they were the ones who would know the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's come back. So he was an old man and had lost his eyesight. Khadija said to Warqa, this her cousin, Listen to the story of your nephew, O my cousin. Warqa asked, O my nephew, what have you seen? So Muhammad described whatever he had seen. Waraka said, "This is the same one who keeps secrets, i.e. the angel Gabriel, whom Allah had sent to Moses. I wish I were young and could live up to the time when your people would turn you out," meaning they're going to reject him. Allah's messenger asked, "Will they drive me out?" Waraka replied in the affirmative and said, anyone who came with something similar to what you have brought was treated with hostility, and if I should remain alive until the day when you will be turned out, then I would support you strongly. But after a few days, Waraka died, and the divine inspiration was also paused for a while. So what he's saying is, Waraka says, essentially, you're a prophet because any man, meaning any prophet who brought revelation like this before, was rejected by his people, turned out or rejected by his people. And he's saying, I wish I wasn't so old, because if I was younger and I could live to see that day when you're rejected, I would be your supporter. Okay, so that's what he means. Now, what's very interesting is, now obviously this account is not parallel in the Torah from, like, there's no account of Muhammad in the Torah in this way, right?
No.
So, but there is something to compare. So Muhammad comes back with his, heart beating severely. He was terrified from his encounter with this thing in the cave. Okay.
Yeah.
Some spirit. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Without judging what that is yet. Mm-hmm. He was obviously terrified. He said he was afraid something would happen to him. He told Khadijah when he came to. Like, initially he's so terrified, his wife has to cover him in blankets until he calms down. And when he does, he tells her this, what happened. And she said, look, basically, you're a good person. Like, Allah wouldn't disgrace you. You're a good person. We like to joke. I don't think Khadijah knows the way of the master. Right? Are you a good person?
Yeah. Literally.
So she's assuming you're a good person, so God wouldn't disgrace you.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, fine. So then she takes him, because he's not convinced, so she takes him to her cousin Waraka, who has familiarity with the previous scriptures. So then he says, no, like this, you're a prophet because you received revelation in this, following the similar pattern as others did. You're going to be treated the same way. And he says the angel that appeared to you is the same one that appeared to Moses. Now that's the interesting thing. So why does he say Moses? He says the angel that appeared to you in the cave is the same one that appeared to Moses. And we have to think, what did Waraka compare Muhammad's experience to? Well, that to Moses. So which story could Waraka be thinking of with an angel appearing to Moses?
The burning bush.
Burning bush. And if you think about it, it's the only one it could be, because he's not coming in the form of an angel other times. So now we as Christians, Christians immediately think, well, but hold on, it's not an angel, it's God, it's the angel of the Lord. So, okay, forget your theology for a second, because we're not trying to debate theology, we're debating the details in the story. It is, okay, sure, it's God, but we're not going to press that point with a Muslim, because it's going to be a distraction. So we're going to say, well, obviously God came in the form of an angel, so we can also say it's an angel. Okay? All right, so there was an angel that appeared to Moses. So that's the one. That's the account. Now, some Muslims will say, no, it can't be that, because according to the Qur'an's account of the burning bush, God did not come in the form of an angel, and there was no angel in the account. God spoke through the bush.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Now that's what they're going to say, but now I'm going to ask them a question. Did Waraka have the Qur'an to know the Qur'an's account of the story? No,
You're gonna
because it hadn't been revealed yet.
Yeah, no, it hadn't been.
Okay, because the only thing that's being revealed were those 3 verses. Usually they say 5 verses from Surah 96 in the cave of Hira, and none of those verses were about the story of Moses and the burning bush, were they?
Yeah, no.
So Waraka didn't know the Quranic version. What does he know? Supposedly, he knows the previous scriptures.
Yeah.
And he's able to say, well, the angel that appeared to you is the angel that appeared to Moses. Okay, so that's going to be, where do we read the account of that? The Torah. Okay. So we're going to look at essentially Exodus 3-4. We're going to summarize it for the sake of time.
Yeah.
And we're going to compare it with this experience Muhammad had. Because essentially, how could, I want you to grasp this. How could Waraka justifiably conclude that it's the same angel?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, other than it was in a cave.
Well, okay. Well, yeah.
Similar in that way.
Moses wasn't in a cave. He was outside.
Mm.
But they both went to a mountain.
Yeah, the mountain, yeah.
Okay. He's at the bottom of the mountain at the burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad went into a mountain in a cave.
Mm-hmm.
They're both on their own.
Yeah.
Okay. But and they both received their initial revelation.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a parallel. I think that's why he makes the connection.
Yeah.
It's essentially when they are commissioned.
Yeah.
But what is the presupposition that's the hidden assumption here? For Waraka to say that it's the same angel, I mean, Waraka wasn't there for either event. So he must be seeing in the story in the Torah, it's so similar.
Yeah.
It's so similar. It's so strikingly similar. It's got to be the same angel. It's got to be so similar. Because even if it's like somewhat similar, you're not going to conclude it's the same angel. It's got to be so similar.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is what drives us to compare the narrative. Okay? So Bukhari Hadith 3 and Exodus 3-4. So what is similar that could have led Waraka to think or compare it? Well, we just said about the two go off on their own into the wilderness, and they go to a mountain, etc., and they get their first revelation. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare each account in 3 stages. Each of them have 3 stages. They go off on their own in the wilderness and are commissioned. So Muhammad goes into the cave. He encounters the angel or the spirit. He receives a revelation, then he leaves. Moses goes off on his own. He goes to the burning bush. He encounters the angel of the Lord. He gets commissioned, and then he leaves. That's the first stage. Second stage is each one goes and tells another person.
Yeah.
So Muhammad goes home and tells his wife Khadijah. Moses goes on to tell Aaron. The third stage is they both go tell other people. So then Muhammad, accompanied by Khadijah, tells Waraka, her cousin. And Moses and Aaron go tell the elders of Israel. Okay? So those are the 3 stages we're going to look at. To keep it quick, we start with Moses and end with Muhammad. So first stage, Moses goes to the burning bush. He encounters the angel. He's given the message. He's told to go back to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the Israelites go. And then Moses says to God, well, but how are the Israelites going to believe me that I'm sent by our God, right? By Yahweh, essentially. So he tells him his name, and then he also tells him, he says, but they're not going to believe me. So he's given 3 signs, 3 miraculous proofs. One is that the staff is thrown down and turns to a serpent. Second is that his hand is put into his cloak and comes out white. And then the third is that you take some of the water of the Nile and pour it on the ground, and it becomes blood.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's given those 3 signs, and then, Moses is still like, but, I'm not a good speaker.
Yeah.
Maybe send someone else. And eventually God gets mad at him. He's like, well, didn't I make the tongue, etc. And, this is the story, right?
Yeah.
And in the end, God says, fine, I will send Aaron with you. Okay. And then Moses leaves that scene. He knows, okay, so that's the end of that scene. So the question is, at the end of that scene, does Moses know that he's commissioned as a prophet by God?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And he has a clear mission.
Yeah, it's very clear.
Okay. And he even has evidences, okay, that he's going to use. So let's go to Muhammad. Goes to the cave of Hira. He encounters the angel/spirit in the cave. He's given the first few verses of the Qur'an, and then he leaves. When he departs the cave, does he know that he's a prophet sent from God?
No.
Right. He doesn't know. What is he feeling at that point?
Fear. Terrified.
Yes. Terrified, exactly. This is not what Muhammad felt, or what Moses felt, but Muhammad felt it, okay? And he didn't think that this was necessarily from God, whereas Moses knew very clearly. In fact, he had evidence. Muhammad wasn't given any miraculous signs or evidences. Second scene, Moses goes and meets up with Aaron and tells him what happened and shows him the signs. And at the end of that scene, who believes that Moses was a prophet?
Aaron.
Yeah, both of them.
Yeah,
Moses
both,
still
yeah.
believes, and Aaron,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So Moses convinced Aaron with evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we go to the second scene for Muhammad. He goes back home to Khadijah, and he's terrified, goes under the blankets. Eventually he comes to, and then she's trying to reassure him, you know, basically, you're a good person. Allah wouldn't disgrace you. And at the end of this scene is who believes that Muhammad is a prophet?
Waraka.
Well, we're not at Waraka yet.
Khadijah.
At home with his
Khadijah
wife.
first. Yeah, reassures him.
Khadijah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so she tries to reassure him. Now, some Muslims say Khadijah wasn't a believer yet,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because the biography of Muhammad says that she's counted first among the believers. That's fine. So let's say either way, I don't really care. So if she was not a Muslim, she didn't believe that he was a prophet yet. Okay, so nobody believed yet.
Yeah.
That's different. Okay, or she believed, but he still didn't believe. That's also different.
Yeah.
Okay, so the one who wasn't there, Khadijah, believed that Muhammad is a prophet, and Muhammad, also the one who was there for the experience, didn't believe yet.
Mm-hmm.
And she's trying to reassure him. Okay, so let's go to third scene. Final scene is Moses and Aaron go tell the elders of Israel. And Aaron performs the signs. And who believes at that point? Everybody. All the elders and the people of Israel believe. So here's the pattern we see with Moses. He, from the beginning point, the first stage, he believes, and he goes and convinces everybody else who wasn't there with miraculous evidences.
Yeah.
Muhammad is taken by his wife Khadijah to her cousin Waraka, and then Waraka says, these stories are so similar.
Yeah.
The angel that appeared to you is the same angel that appeared to Moses. Because they're so similar? Are they similar?
Yeah. No.
No. I mean, so why did Muhammad believe that he's a prophet? Essentially because of the testimony of a guy who says he's acquainted with the previous scriptures, and his accounts must be so similar that he can conclude it must be the same angel.
Yeah.
When he wasn't there for either event.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what Torah he's reading.
Yeah.
But or whether he was telling the truth, maybe he was telling the truth. I don't know what his motivation was. But I'm gonna say, well, like, unfortunately for Muhammad, because he was illiterate, he didn't have access to read the Torah himself.
Yeah.
Thank God we are not in his position.
Yeah.
We can check the Torah ourselves and see, was Waraka right?
Yeah. No, of course
No,
not.
he wasn't.
Not even close.
Right? So I'm with Muhammad. Muhammad was right.
That's interesting.
Waraka was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Right? Muhammad was right. Unfortunately, Muhammad was not literate, could not double check what the people said about the Torah. He had to trust what they told him. I think by the end of his prophetic ministry, so to speak, he lost trust.
Yeah.
Because he realized that they were tricking him about some things. But I don't think he knew the extent of it, because the Qur'an is filled with stories that obviously came from Jews telling him stories, and they're all wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're not in that position. We can check for ourselves. I'll just say, kind of, to try to, wrap things up. Okay, so summary conclusions of these 5 points. The Quran affirmed the Torah in the time of Muhammad in the 7th century. We have manuscripts predating that time. The author of the Quran is not the same author of the Torah. The stories are completely irreconcilable in many ways. By the way, I didn't emphasize in our video so far how many ways, right? And I'm going to see if I can fit in a chart before we close off the video about it to show that, okay, because it's actually quite a lot. Thirdly, Abraham and Ishmael never traveled to Mecca. They didn't build the Kaaba. And since they didn't build it, it was pagans who established it. And so Islam is not an Abrahamic religion. Ishmael didn't marry an Arab woman in Mecca, but married an Egyptian woman, and he lived in the region of modern-day Jordan. Muhammad was not an Ishmaelite. Muhammad was not a candidate for prophethood because he didn't have Abrahamic ancestry. Muhammad's spiritual experience did not follow in the pattern of previous true prophets like Moses. Unfortunately, Muhammad could not fact-check the claims of people like Waraka or later rabbis who told him false information about that and convinced him that he was a prophet from God.
Yeah.
So at this point, essentially what we want to do is we want to read how a Muslim is reacting to us. If they are basically see that there's a problem and their confidence is really significantly shaken, then we're going to go on to relay Old Testament foundations and then share the gospel. If they're not, we're going to add more accounts that are different.
Yeah.
Okay, and press them on those accounts. Because until their confidence in the Quran is shaken, they still think it's from God, and then they're gonna evaluate anything I make claims about theology and so on through the lens of what the Quran teaches. So if they are in a position to hear more, like we're going to move on from the Quran, then we go through what we call basically the 5 pillars of biblical Christianity that we're going to relay. So we've dismantled 5 pillars. We're going to relay or construct 5 new pillars. 4 of them are from Old Testament, and the last one's the gospel. So the first is that sin results in death and corruption. We look at Genesis 2 and 3. We also point out that talk about blood atonement for sin, especially from Leviticus 17:11. Also the garments in the Garden of Eden that were made from skins establish death as God kills an animal to cover them, the shame for their sin. Number 3, God appeared as a man in the Old Testament, which we already see in the same passage in Genesis 3. God walked in the garden, and then especially in Genesis 18, he is one of the 3 men who appear to Abraham at his tent. Yep. One of the 3 is Yahweh. So what we see is God appearing in the form of a man, theophanies, appearances of God already in the Old Testament, already in the first part of the Torah.
Yeah.
Right? The first account with people, he's walking in the garden, and with Abraham. It's all over the place. I don't need the New Testament. It's like, I like to say, we didn't make it up.
Yeah, it's always been there.
Okay, so it's in the Torah. Now you might wonder, why don't the Jews believe it? Well, because the rabbis reinterpret it. And like the Quran says, they distort it. Yeah. Okay? But they have the same Torah as us in terms of the text. So they're just not being faithful to it, whereas we are. Number 4, who we asked who was the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. Well, the Messiah prophesied to die for the sins of his people. Okay. I mean, that's already, I almost don't even need the New Testament. I got the gospel.
Literally, we don't need to go to the New Testament.
Right. But then I'm going to close it if I have time to go to the gospel and the New Testament. I'll go through the Romans road, for all sin fall short of the glory of God in Romans 3:23. Talk about the analogy of the courtroom and use the 10 Commandments to talk about sin. Romans 6:23, for all wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus. At the right time, Jesus died for us, right, while we were still sinners. And then how do we receive the gift of salvation? In Romans 10:9-10, if we believe in our heart and confess with our mouth. Yeah. Right? So that's essentially how we would close it for them and sharing the gospel. But I can only get there if I've gone through the Old Testament foundations first to re-clarify all the things that the Quran has distorted. Yeah. And its retelling of all of the accounts. And only if I've undercut their confidence in the Quran for them to hear that.
Yeah, because they're not even ready to receive it unless that is undermined and shown to be for what it was. And I really like what you said about that it wasn't even Muhammad's revelation, it was Warwick's and Khadijah's, which I think that's an interesting take that I haven't yet heard, because it almost puts Muhammad in a victim position. Like, hey, don't even look at Muhammad. He was led astray by these people in his life that, he had a really terrifying experience, probably with a demon. And they convinced him otherwise. It wasn't his revelation, it was theirs, which I think is really interesting for sure. And going through that process, I don't know how that wouldn't shake confidence, especially with the other diagram you had of all the stories and the inconsistencies that we have in the Torah versus the Quran. Do you mind showing? You want to show that real quick before we
I'm just getting that.
Close off? Yeah. Check this out.
So
this
you might wonder how many differences there would be in the story. So this is an ongoing research I'm doing. I'm comparing all the narratives Of course, you're never going to do this with an individual Muslim. You're not going to go through all the stories.
Yeah, it would be.
But what I'm trying to do is examine all the stories in comparison that are parallel and note all of the specific differences in the details, right? So this is what I have so far in black is developed. Blue is not yet done. And red is the ongoing tallies. So, we were talking about Joseph before. So usually I ask the question to people, if you don't look at the chart for a second, but if you were to imagine so there's 98 verses in the story of Joseph in the Quran, 98 verses that tell that story. Try to think, based on when we looked at those verses, how many differences you think might be there in the whole account. Like if you were just to estimate.
Yeah, in that story of Joseph.
Yeah.
In that story of Joseph. If I didn't look at it, I would say, I don't know, maybe 20, 25, something like that.
Yeah, and you'd think that would still be quite a lot.
Yeah, that is still a lot, in my opinion.
Well, so I've gone through in, granular detail, and I've counted 941.
That's insane.
For the 98 verses.
Yeah, right? That's wild.
It's almost 10 per verse.
That's crazy.
Because when you change, it's very important to understand, when you change one detail, it has a cascading effect in a narrative that is, interwoven. So it's all interconnected. So like that example of Jacob thinking that Joseph was dead in Genesis when he's brought the bloody shirt, later on in Genesis, he still thinks he's dead. Okay, while the brothers are going down to Egypt, he's talking about poor Joseph, and he's Joseph is lost, and don't take Benjamin now. I've already lost Joseph, and now Simeon's lost also.
Yeah.
Right. So he thinks Joseph is dead. Okay. So if you change it in one place for it to be consistent, you got to change it in all the other places. So now I want you to think, though, like what the real problem is. This is not just about, in general, that the Torah was corrupted. This is the claim that Islam is making, because everything will come back to this claim. The Torah was corrupted. Your accounts are not the original accounts. The Quranic account is the right account. Well, that's amazing that you think that as a Muslim, because I want you then to explain why the Jews changed, not in general the Torah, all the specific differences.
Yeah. What would be the motivation? Yeah.
What would be the motivation? And when, and also give me manuscript evidence.
Yeah.
Okay. But even before we get to the evidence, I want you to think about it. Just take that specific detail in the story. Jacob's reaction to the bloody shirt. Why would they change it, even hypothetically?
Yeah, right? I want to know that.
And they don't have an answer because there is no answer. So this is what I say. I'll lay it out for them. You got two ways you can try to explain it. Unintentional change or an intentional change. So was it unintentional, like an accident? Could a scribe have accidentally copied the manuscript from the original uncorrupted Torah, which according to Islam would be telling the story the way the Quran does?
Yeah.
So the original Genesis told it that Jacob saw through the deception of his sons and thought Joseph was still alive. That's what Genesis originally said. And the Jews changed it to what we have now. So could that happen by accident with a scribe copying it? No, it's too much, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you change it in one place, you can't, by accident, you didn't change it in the other place
it's
by accident.
All over, yeah.
Consistently. Okay? So if it was not unintentional, but it was intentional, you have to have a motive.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you 4 hypothetical motives. And if I say, look, if you can think of any others, we can talk about it. But let's do hypothetical motives. So theological changes, ethical changes, prophecies of Muhammad being changed, or political motive. So first, is there any change in theology by changing the story of Jacob's reaction to the bloody shirt?
No.
No, there's no doctrine changing.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything changing about teaching about morality and ethics?
No.
No. Third, any prophecies of Muhammad there being changed? Lastly, what's the political motive?
Yeah.
So I like to point out, like in both narratives, Jacob and his children end up in Egypt. And then, eventually they escape through the Exodus. So there's no political changes by changing that part of the story. So if there's no motive, even hypothetically, it wasn't changed intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't changed intentionally or unintentionally, it wasn't changed.
That's so good.
So you can basically press this on every detail, and the details that are not theological and not ethical are the most important details.
Yeah.
Because then Muslims have no hypothetical explanation even.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? And we're saying, look, I got 940 to go through to talk about Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be difficult with me, I've got so far more than 2,300 for all the stories that I've compared so far. And we're probably about halfway in comparing all the stories. So we got maybe 5,000 differences. And, these are not similar at all.
Yeah.
So Christians need to stop saying, oh, yeah, our stories are basically similar, or we got the same prophets. I'm sorry, if you've got 940 differences in the story of Joseph, it's not the same Joseph.
Thank you guys for listening. I really hope that this will bless you. It'll encourage you and it'll equip you to be able to engage with your Muslim brothers and sisters, where you can share the gospel with them and understand that you can have compassion in sharing this with them. But we want to make sure that you like this video, share this with a friend, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any notifications that we have in the future. We love you guys, and we will see you next week.